Hello and welcome to Opportunity Homes San Antonio's Operations and Real Estate Committee meeting. Please note that this meeting will be recorded in its entirety. I will now conduct Commissioner roll call. Chair Gabriel Lopez.
Here.
Committee Chair Gilbert Casillas.
Here.
Commissioner Dalia Contreras. Commissioner Estrellita Garcia Diaz.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Garcia. Commissioner Vincent Robinson.
Here.
Commissioner Leela Powell. Doug Ponick, Board of Commissioners Attorney.
I'm here.
President and CEO Ed Hinojosa Jr.
I'm here.
And I'd also like to welcome our interpreter located at the back of the room should you need their assistance. The time is 1:02. You may call the meeting to order.
Thank you. The Board of Commissioners or its committee may hold a closed meeting pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071-076 for consultation concerning attorney-client matters, real estate, litigation, personnel, and security matters. The Board or committee reserves the right to enter into closed meeting at any time during the course of the meeting. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
There is one citizen signed up to speak, Liz Cortines.
Is Liz here? Okay.
There are no other individuals signed up to speak.
We'll move on to our public hearing, item number 3. Public hearing regarding Resolution 6514, authorizing the proposed 2024-2025 Moving to Work MTW Agency Plan, including revisions to the MTW Plan, the Public Housing Admission and Continued Occupancy Policy, ACOP, the Housing Choice Voucher Administration Plan, the Admin Plan, the Capital Fund Program Plan, CFP, and the 5-year Capital Improvement and Development Plan, and the Family Self-Sufficiency, FSS Program Action Plan. Richard Milk, Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is our annual initial presentation of the proposed FY25 MTW plan and public hearing, so it's an opportunity for comment on the plan.
Richard, if we can hold the public hearing but the presentation, we want to table till the next meeting when we have our other 2 commissioners present.
Typically, we provide the presentation as part of the context for the public hearing, the public input, but I'll defer to a process.
So the public hearing is for purposes of informing the public, and so to adequately do so, it seems to me we need to hear the presentation so that that part is accomplished. The board can still have a conversation with it at another meeting to actually vote to approve the plan. But for purposes of the public hearing, I think we need to make sure that we give an adequate notice to the public of the elements of the plan and so forth. So if you would allow that, I think that would be wise.
Okay.
We will be presenting it again. We can present it again at the when we come back to the board for the final approval.
One point, how long have we notified the public of the public hearing for this?
We posted on February 14th.
So there's a long distance notice that we've given the public about this. We would have to do that again if we were not to hold the public hearing today.
With the same amount of time, or
Yes.
we just need to notify them in advance if we're...
No, same amount of time, because the whole point of having a public hearing is to give that adequate lengthy notice as required by federal regulations.
30 days.
Yeah, so
Oh.
that's the glitch. Now, you don't have to take action today, but you've got to, if you want to postpone this, you'd have to give that same 30-day notice.
Okay, I guess then my suggestion, it's up to the board, but to the committee at least, high level, to meet the minimum requirement, because at the minimum, Commissioner Contreras, Commissioner Powell need to be available.
Absolutely.
So that way, just high level it,
We'll do the,
to
Whatever's
meet
required
to
for
meet the requirement.
Right, to meet the requirement of the public hearing.
we'll just, I'll streamline this then, and, but we'll have the information out there.
Or might I suggest this, because this is one thing I assume, I went through the 100+ pages, and as best as I could, I should say, and it's a lot of information. But we have I think it's probably important, one of the questions they're gonna wanna know is how we're incorporating the 5 priorities that we identified the last meeting, how those can be incorporated. So maybe if we do the discussion item first, and then we have that as a prism, then you can touch on the items, hey, this is where this is incorporated, this is where this is incorporated. That way we can see that. Again, high level, or let's just push it to next week, and that way we know that they're both here.
This presentation is very high level and sort of pro forma. It's something we do every year according to a template that HUD provides.
Mhm.
So it is by nature very high level. There's very little detail. So it would be, but it provides enough information so that folks that do want to provide input know where and what the context is. And then we get into further detail in the other slides.
Then can, your committee, but
No, go ahead.
can we have can we do the discussion then? So that's more, so that way we're aware of it. I know we'll have at least one commissioner that wasn't here before, and just swap them right now.
So we have the discussion item, which is number 7
Right.
on the agenda.
And then and again, the importance being now we get to see it. We're going to hear parts of your plan, at least on the high level, and then this gives us the opportunity then, as we're hearing the MTW, okay, this is where this would fit in.
Yeah.
Can we
Are
do that?
we able to
Count-
change that
Can we
order?
switch
You can
Counselor,
change
can
the
we-
order. The point
Yes.
of the public hearing is to just make sure that we have checked the box with regard to what's required of us for purposes of public hearing. The public hearing doesn't have to come at the beginning of your meeting or in the, at any particular time. You can take up another agenda item that is related to it and discuss it as you would any agenda item. But when we get to the public hearing part, then we have to do what is required of that. So certainly you can take another item before the public hearing.
Yeah, I think that's more, I think that's, I'm in agreement with that discussion, that's a discussion item of number 7.
Okay.
I'd like to ask that we table the MTW report and public hearing till after the discussion of item number 7.
I just want to confirm that we're not time certain on the public hearing when we posted, or was it?
It's posted for 1 o'clock for the meeting, so it's, you're not
Anytime
required to
within
do
that.
it. Yes,
Okay.
anytime after that, you're fine.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll go into discussion item number 7. Update and discussion regarding development and partnerships, maintenance and resident safety, past due rents, wait lists, communication plan, and related topics. Brandy Bettis, Chief Real Estate and Development Officer, Diana Fiedler, Chief Financial Officer, Michael Reyes, Public Affairs Officer, and Muriel Roeder, Chief Administrative Officer, and Richard Milk, Planning Officer.
So Commissioners, on this item, we have 5 plans that the board asked us to bring back today. And in addition to that, there were a number of questions asked during that presentation. So we've tried to address those as well in this plan. For example, the first item relates to the MTW funding. And there was also a question related to trade-offs, and so we've tried to address that as well. So Diana is going to kick off the presentation with a discussion of the MTW funding, and then we'll get into some of the other items.
Good afternoon. So we became a full-fledged MTW agency in 2008, where we expanded our MTW to the entire public housing portfolio, right? So at that point, we became block grant funded. That block grant includes public housing funding, capital fund funding, which is for capital projects, and then our housing choice voucher funding. Right, so those 3 things are all together, and they are fungible between one funding stream and the other. We still have to apply the same way a traditional housing authority does for public housing, and they still calculate our public housing funding via formula the same way they do a traditional housing authority. Same thing applies to capital fund. It's formulaic. HUD applies that formula to our housing authority and provides that funding. Housing choice voucher is a little different. They took our lease up, our housing choice voucher lease up at the time in 2008 and said, this is your funding. And then what they have done since then is applied an inflationary factor each year to increase that amount based on inflation, which until very recently has usually been about 2%. And then as HUD does for most of its funding, they also can apply a proration, either up or down. It's usually down. It's usually less than 100%. Post-COVID, we had a few years where it may have been above 100% for proration itself. When we expanded, we made the commitment to fund public housing as well as additional resident services, because one of the 3 statutory objectives of MTW is to encourage self-sufficiency. So it was a lot of additional resident services that were provided beginning around that time, around 2008. There was an entire department started, that's the CDI department, which is now resident services, to provide a whole litany of services to residents. Right? So then the second criteria comes with that funding is that we must serve substantially the same number of units that we were serving in 2008 when we expanded MTW. So that is a static 5,749 public housing units, which is our lease up at the time. The HCV units have increased over time. So we started off with, I believe, 11,700 units. And then if we get additional housing choice voucher funding throughout the years, they add those few units on. We roll them into our MTW baseline. So the 2024, substantially the same requirement is that we serve 18,170 families with these funds. So since there was some concern about the $18 million shortfall in funding in public housing, I wanted to assure you that in this block grant, in calendar year 23 funding combined, there is enough money to cover that shortfall. Because again, of the 3 buckets of funding, public housing is historically the most underfunded that HUD has, right, throughout their portfolio, right? So we did go into this knowing that there would be losses in public housing, right? Typically, historically, it's been about $6 million a year, that loss. In fiscal year 23, sort of like post-COVID, things happening, right, increase in inflation, that amount of funding needed increased from $6 million to $10.8 million. And then you could see that the current fiscal year, we're trending closer to $17 or $18 million need. But again, I want to assure you that in calendar year 23, the funding itself for those 3 programs does cover all 3 programs, right? So the impact on funding of increasing HCV payments to landlords, so that's our HAP payments, right? So if we were a traditional housing authority, so a non-MTW housing authority, and we experience increased rents due to whatever, increased rents in a neighborhood or throughout, or just inflationary increase in rents, we have to be able to cover those rents for the current year. But in the subsequent year, HUD would fund those housing authorities that additional monies, right? But with our MTW funding, because we started with that 11,700 funding, and the increases being only the incremental small number of vouchers that we've added, plus the inflationary factor, our funding is much more static, right? It comes with the flexibilities, but this particular funding is much more static than a traditional housing authority who would be able to recoup those funding losses from the previous year. Right, so just stop me if you have any questions, Because I know this is a lot and it's complicated.
Yeah, yes, I should have mentioned that, Commissioners. We
Please.
are covering a lot of
Yeah.
information here, so please stop us and ask questions to clarify any points we're making.
Okay, right, I was writing as you were doing this. So we've moved from 6 million projected shortfalls, and then it moved up to 10 million,
10.8.
10.8 million, and now it's projected at 17,
17 or 18.
17 or 8 million. So what's the plan to reverse that trend? Or is,
Okay, so we're
Yeah.
you were definitely, we
That's
have
the
some
next slide,
slides
okay.
coming up. Yes, sir.
okay.
Okay, I have one question on these. Is the 18 million shortfall because of shortage in funding, or are those unpaid rents?
So largely a shortage of funding. You know, this public housing funding provides just over $400 per unit, right? And operating costs, even in the market, is closer to 800, right? So historically, that's the most underfunded program at HUD. So
So
the-
then that $18 million number wasn't unpaid rents, it's
So a
shortages, portion of it
A
is.
portion of it is
but-
bad debt, yes, sir. Mhm.
Okay.
But largely, it's underfunding, and then, again, just increased costs over time. This is significant increased costs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then for a little bit of good news, there is an increase in the 2024 federal funding levels. Now, public housing increased at the federal level 8.5%. I am not expecting an 8.5% increase in our funding necessarily over the formulaic funding, which we've already applied for 24 funding. It's $32 million. What we are hoping for is for a closer to 100% proration, because right now they're funding us at an 87% proration. So if we could recover that and HUD would maybe fund up to 100%, we would recoup $4 million, right? We'd have an extra $4 million already in public housing, and that's my hope.
So we're on a continuing resolution that is underfunding public housing at a lower rate than, it's funding it at a lower rate than it has in recent
In a
years.
while, yes.
Yeah.
87% is pretty low. So then, Section 8 HAP renewals increased by 7.9%, and I don't believe that we're going to see an increase in inflation or proration anywhere near that amount. I think that we're hoping for somewhere closer to 5%. There is a tool that HUD calls the two-year tool that they provide for housing authorities to plan based on, and that particular two-year tool today says that there's a 5.12% increase in funding, but we can't rely on that, right? It's just, that's the information that they put out there so far. So maybe that's their indication, but we don't know yet, right? We'll find out in the next couple of months, hopefully before the budget comes to the board in May.
So, and just to add to what Diana said, whenever we became an MTW agency in 2008 or 2009, we made the commitment to use some of our block grant to fund the underfunding of public housing at that point, going forward. And we've done that every year since 2008. And then the other commitment we made was to fund what we called community development initiatives, which is a significant support services that we're funding ourselves that HUD doesn't pay for, and that's running about $2.5 million a year in recent years.
What's the underfunding? The first part you're talking about, we utilize some of these funds for the underfunding of public housing.
Public housing historically has always been underfunded, and in recent years, as Diana mentioned, it's been $5 to $9 million per year. So the formula, HUD has a formula that they use to calculate what they think the cost should be. And there's some disparities in the formula based on where you are as a location. So typically in the Southwest, like here in San Antonio, we receive less funding for public housing than some of the agencies that are located in the Northeast, for example. And it's a formulaic thing that was developed decades ago by HUD, and that underfunding has been persistent, I think, since the 80s or so. Public housing has historically been underfunded. So that commitment we made to public housing. And then remember, HUD provides a very, very basic level of service, and in many cases we are committing additional resources, and we'll get into these trade-offs in a bit in the presentation. But we've committed security, which is not funded by HUD, so we take, that's an additional cost. All of the customer service initiatives, garbage pickup, we've increased substantially, and we'll hear more about those services. So everything we've done to improve customer service has also added cost onto our public housing portfolio. So,
Well, and I think that's probably part of where, when we discuss those, discuss these items as these 5 priorities, that's where we see that. And again, we're high level and not educated in some parts of this, but we absolutely support public housing. But in the absence, or rather in this increase in deficiency that continues while still wanting to maintain these services, I think what we were looking for are then what were the things that we were doing in the past that was creating funds, creating monies. And that's when we started talking about the development side, which is why we had listed that as a priority. If we follow the policy, there are opportunities for this organization to earn funds, so that way we can support the things that are not funded by HUD. And that'll continue to add to the money, and that's what we're looking for. Like the $18 million shortfall specific, it's like, how is that broken out? What Commissioner Casillas asked about is it all rent arrears? Okay, if it's not rent arrears, then what else is it? And it sounds like some of it is from the programs that we've identified that we continue to want to support. All that adds up to this 18 million. And
Absolutely.
maybe for us to see that and keeping it simple, then that's why we need to collect rents. And that's not just I know we're going to get to that part of it in this presentation, but that's why it's important, that the rent arrear thing, and then as well as the development thing. We have true partners in the community that are willing to help. Now, granted, that's incumbent upon you guys, staff, to figure out if it's a right deal for us. But those are the things that we're looking for, because they'll generate the funding.
Right.
So, sorry.
that is new funding. The other thing that produces new funding is the 1,700 units that we've been talking about that are Faircloth units that are unattached to facilities right now. So that's another way to approach. And as you know, we've been talking with our partners about utilizing those 1,700 units. But there's another piece of funding that Diana's going to get into now that's a significant cost impact.
Right. So here are our HAP costs over time, and you can see that prior to COVID, right, they were pretty consistent, right? And even post-COVID, we saw only increases that were close to inflation or even below inflation, right, at 4%. All of a sudden, in 2023, there were some significant moves to increase payment standards, and that has culminated in this very large increase in a per unit HAP cost in 2023, at the end of 2023, of almost 17%. So that's a $15 million increase to our annual payments out to landlords that will impact the 2024 calendar year. So this is this $779 per unit cost at the end of 23 with this $15 million impact then carries over to 2024, which creates this, when we have additional cost increases in 2024, and then we are projecting to end 2024 calendar year at $865 per unit, which would increase the subsequent year, 2025, by $11.5 million. So this has had the largest impact on the stressors of the three funding components of MTW. There's a note at the top there that calculates that based on the 2024 per unit cost, every $1 million that we're going to cover in increased costs costs us 100 vouchers essentially. So that's the trade-off, right?
So HUD funds us a fixed amount of, I think the number's about $770 per voucher, and that's the calculation that they make. And if our costs increase, we're able to issue fewer vouchers because we have a limited amount of cash.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're trying to show here is the increase in rental costs that have been experienced in the local market, we're having to absorb. And ultimately, that means we can issue fewer vouchers because we don't get additional funding from HUD to compensate for that.
But our vouchers aren't all being used anyways right now, because there's just not enough units out there that accept them.
Actually, we're leased up to our target level right now of 11.1.
To the target level, but
Right.
haven't we heard before that, for example, some of our partners organizations, we've given them vouchers, but they can't get them used?
So we have people that are searching, that are looking, and every month there's people that drop off the program, new people that come on just through normal attrition. And I think the number of people we're searching, last I looked, was 500 or 600 units. Is that right, Brandy? She's shaking her head. 500 or 600 families have vouchers in hand that are looking for units as part of our normal rotation. And we also have additional vouchers that we've allocated to some of our partners that they're trying to get leased up.
Okay.
So these are some of the increased public housing service levels that have taken over time, right? So we've increased our maintenance staffing levels. There's been a significant number of increased staff members since 2020, and a lot of that had to do with the tight labor market during COVID and post-COVID, which really required us to hire people that were less experienced, which then created a backlog of work orders and other maintenance needs. And then at that point, the decision was made to sort of separate the less skilled work from the more skilled work and hire less skilled workers that are called porters. And then these porters then performed those other tasks, which then allow the maintenance techs to in turn focus back on the work orders and the backlog of maintenance items. And then so that staffing level is being reviewed at this point for the 25 budget. Security services, there have been a significant increase in the number of hours we've used over time. This has to do with events that have happened, fires, elevator outages, things like that, individual requests for increased services at individual properties. Pest control, I think the board over time has heard a lot of pest control issues, so we've significantly increased pest control services. They moved from a quarterly service to a monthly service per unit. They expanded the service areas to those with water. They used to be just with water, so bathrooms, kitchens. Now it's every room in the unit. And then we also send a staff member in with them to walk the unit with them to ensure compliance with the contract. Garbage pickup has expanded. That cost has increased incredibly over the past few years. We've increased services for bulk pickup services just to keep the trash down. We also have, a lot of like overage charges, things like that. But individual properties will request either larger containers or more frequent pickup. So that is an increased service over time. I think that you guys have gotten reports on the beautification projects that public housing's been doing, right? So there's been aesthetics, safety improvements over at all of the public, several of the public housing properties, exterior paint, parking lot resurfacing, greenscaping, additional lighting, stuff like that. And then finally, resident events. Every property has quarterly resident events, so that also increases the service level. So here are the actual funding trade-offs, because this was, requested, right? So this is what, these are the options right on the table. We can reduce the number of housing choice voucher families served. We can reduce the public housing service levels that we just discussed, right, that were increased over the past few years. Reduce resident supported services. Reduce HCV payments to landlords and payment standards, which would reduce our per unit cost. And then reduce funding for preservation and expansion, which are those funds that we've been using to acquire the year 15 tax credit properties that are converting over to Beacon.
We've also used those funding, we've also used this funding, the block grant funding, to do large projects such as the Victoria Plaza renovation that we
Renovations.
completed last summer. That $20 million came from this funding. Over the years, we were, let's call it, saving money towards that project. The other project that we saved money for was the Alazan redevelopment, the first phase. That $17 million also comes from this particular funding. So over the years, in addition to covering our expenses, we've also been able to save a certain amount of money that was going into preservation and expansion. Today, I think it's accurate for me to say, Diana, we're covering our expenses with the block grant, but we're not able to put the money away for preservation and expansion future activities.
That is the projection for 2024, yes.
On the second page, on the previous page, Diane, do y'all have like a breakdown of like garbage bulk pickup, security services? Is there a breakdown between the different properties on where those increases are coming in mostly? Like
Yes,
garbage and bulk pickup. I know you were talking about the overage, having to spend more time. Like, is there certain properties that are targeted that maybe we could focus more on that? and
Yes, we can certainly get that for you. Yes, yes. I've been working with the public housing folks for,
So we have a public housing budget for each property, and so we can tell you how much it's increased. But basically, we used to, I think, do garbage pickup either once or twice a week, and now we have more frequent pickup. Plus, we have roll-off dumpsters that are in place that people can discard larger items. You may remember that one of the complaints we heard was that people were coming from other parts of the other neighborhoods to dump stuff on our property, particularly over the weekend. So we've tried to address all of that, but there's a cost associated with it as well. I see Muriel's going to talk about our garbage.
Yes, Commissioner. Also, you weren't on the board, but a couple of years ago, right after the pandemic started, we had our garbage vendors come to us and significantly increase the amount that they were requesting for just basic garbage pickup. And when we say significantly, it was over 10%. So that has then made a ripple effect. So a lot of that is just the basic, a large increase that happened a couple of years ago that has continued.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand it over to Brandy now for development.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I'm going to go over the development parts of the presentation as well as some other operation items. So I believe during the last board meeting, there was a request to look at the current and existing development policy, and many of the board members today were not on the board back when the policy was approved by the commissioners, and that was from December of 2020. That policy was established, and it outlined a lot of our strategies related to the preservation and expansion of housing stock. And so some key indicators in that policy today was cross-sector collaboration, really focused on anti-displacement, and we are really seeing our efforts there when we talk about Alazon and some of the work that we're trying to really make sure that we're addressing the needs of those residents as well as the community when we talk about anti-displacement. Neighborhood revitalization, we saw that work with Choice on the work that we did on the east side, and so when we're looking at developments, it's not just the communities that the residents are going to live in, but the neighborhood that they're going to live by. There is conversations about mixed income communities in there as well. Development in areas of low existing supply. So we know that we're always challenged with expanding the needs of affordable housing, but also expanding the needs of public housing in other areas of the city of San Antonio and not just in segregated parts of the city. We wanted to also be good partners, and we're looking at the community need, and that we're basing it off of the SHIP as well as our wait list. And so y'all have heard a lot of conversations about our wait list and the needs, and it continues to grow. And later on in this presentation, Richard Milk will be giving a little bit more information about the wait list. And then also part of, and it was not necessarily in the policy, but in the memo that was presented to the board, we did talk about our goal internally is to make sure that we're focusing on our 30% AMI units. And so new developments that we're looking for is at least 10% at AMI. Again, the policy today does not have that language in there, but the intent was to make sure that the commissioners know that we're trying to find development at 10% AMI. At least 10% of the units are allocated to 30% AMI.
We are doing that.
Doing that, and we'll get into some of the specific projects, and you'll see that we have been very active in doing that. There are a few projects that don't have that goal, and in those cases, and I won't call specific projects out, but they're on the list here. We'll be able to look at. We were more focused on generating revenue, as you were talking about,
Right.
that we can bring back into our organization.
Okay. And I don't want, that's why the full board made that decision in terms of our priority. We want to make sure, we absolutely support our public housing initiatives, the deepest affordability. In today's economic environment, when those things, when it's not cost effective to do so, I think that's what we're looking for, then let's raise that level. We'll do what we can with what we can in accordance with our policy. That's why it's good to hear, okay, as long as we're maintaining that 10%, because that's what the policy requires, to go above that 10% is a problem. Because then if it messes up any sort of development activity, then that could potentially kill a deal, so to speak. And that's what we don't want to do. We want to do everything within this organization's, any of the tools associated with this organization, that's what we want to utilize. And at the minimum, if we at least bring those to the board, then this board gets to make that decision as to whether or not, because it very well could be, no, it doesn't make sense. And that's going to be based on staff's recommendation. Hey, we like this one, we don't like this one, and these are the reasons why. But we do know that there's, we may be one of the only organizations or the fewest of the organizations that can come in and say, we'll help you, whether it be through utilizing our vouchers, whether it be utilizing maybe even some situations helping with GAP within reason, or just helping to get the deals across the finish line. Because any unit that we don't have yesterday, that we may be able to get tomorrow, helps a family from our wait list. And all of that is geared towards that. I think that's when we just identify these priorities, and discussing the rent arrears. There may be some difficult choices. Hey, we have to consider if they're not doing X, then we move on, because there are people on our wait list that we can now give them a unit that might be paying versus the ones that are there that are not paying. And that's why all of it is geared towards that, to figure out a way to help and assist and at least help from the financial standpoint, because that's what we want to see. We want to reverse that trend, that 18 million that we talked about. There has to be, I've got to believe this organization can control that. And we can by maybe just doing just a little bit more in certain areas, whether it be development or whether it be in rent collections. But, sorry, I went off. Keep going.
And on top of what our chairman spoke about and the consensus of the board members is that how many deals have been out there that we haven't heard about and that possibly we would like to hear about them and know what's on the table. We had 3 last year that were approved in 2023 on this list that I'm looking at that the board approved. But how many other deals that possibly would have worked for us that the staff said, well, we don't want to move this forward? We kind of want you all to present those things to the board and let us decide through your recommendations so we want to move forward or not.
So we do have this filter, so the deals that we do should be based on this filter of our development policy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other SHIP partners, for example, the Housing Trust, are focused on higher affordability, 60 and 80%. While we've done some deals in that category in the past, that's not consistent with our development policy. So we want to make sure what we're bringing to the board is consistent with our development policy as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to go through the different developments and where we're at in some of the cycle. And I just want the board to know that this is just the list of today. We are going to come back in a future meeting and actually go into more detail on each of the projects and discuss where they're at on track based off of the original plans to get these developments up. And so these are our current developments that are under construction. And as you can see, we have a couple developments that are scheduled to be completed in June. Others later on this year. And then, of course, we go all the way into early 26. And those are our homes that we're working with the city as well. And we received some bond funding. The next slide.
Can you go back?
I sure can.
Where's Fields of Somerset?
So Fields of Somerset is not under construction at this time. So these are just the developments under construction. So I believe Fields of Somerset, we're just at bond inducements and we haven't gotten to that slide yet.
Oh, okay. So, there's another slide?
There's multiple slides at different parts of the construct or development phase.
Okay, sorry.
And we're also going to try to update the proper development phases so the board knows where we're at in the future presentations. This is the income mix for these developments, and so as we talked about per the development policy, we are really trying to focus on that 10% at 30%, but you will see some of these developments that are not necessarily meeting the internal goal that we have set, but some of those are for reasons that what we've talked about in the past to help generate revenue so we can continue to do some of those deep affordable units. And so you can see here we have 54 units of Snowden, which are income-based units, and those are our what we'll call local non-traditional, and then we go up between 20% all the way up to market units at Petrenko and Josephine. So these are the projects that we've actually done bond inducements for, and so these are the 3 at this time, and I do apologize, Fields at Somerset did not make it on here, and we are still trying to have conversations with that. Right now, I think, as Ed mentioned, that some of these developments, we're really trying to look at them, making sure that they are moving forward, that they have, and they're meeting our needs. Some of them, they are still working through and trying to get some additional funding to secure some large gaps that they have. And so that's what we're vetting through the team to make sure that when we're bringing these deals to the board, that we've done our due diligence with it. So I apologize, Commissioner, it is not on there.
So, okay. So all 3 of these are deals that we've induced.
These 3 are, I will tell you, Ingram Square, that is not going to turn into a partnership. That is strictly just bonds.
And we're just making the development fee or the bond fee.
We're getting a bond fee,
Bond issuance
yes.
fee. Okay. The viability of Augustine Phase 1, Phase 2, is that the same? It's the same project, just 2 different phases of it? Or two different applications?
It's two different applications, but they're right next to each other. So, and it's staggered. So the construction of one would start much earlier than
Then the construction of the
second.
other?
And it's a lot of units too, so we don't really want, 600, 700 units coming online at one time anyway.
Is that the one at Highway 16 and 410?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, there's a lot of units going up.
A lot
Yeah.
of units going in there.
I was gonna say that, and I get, Fields of Somerset, I want to bring that up again, because we've induced the bonds on that one, so this, we've given, hey, let's see if this can go through, because they've got to work their deal. But why aren't we putting it on there right now?
So they still have a gap. They haven't said that in fact, the last communication I had with them, they said the project didn't look viable at this point. So, I mean, it's something we should have listed on here as a bond inducement, and we haven't really had any further discussion since that point.
Okay.
On future presentations, I'll make sure it's added back in.
Okay, and that being one of them, only because, familiar with Augustine, obviously, because we've seen this one. But those are the deals. If there's ways to help them, like on Augustine, like on Fields, Ingram, it's a different animal, I get that. But those are the things that we need to do. And sometimes maybe, are we doing everything possible? And that's really what I want to, is there an opportunity today with any of these that can help them with anything? And what is that? Because that's what this board should hear. Hey, well, if we did this, it would help it. And it might be that hey, this may not be the best deal for us, or that it could be a great deal
Yeah.
for us. That's what we want to see. I think it's time, because at this point now, we have to have something coming in, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. On that particular one, the last they've said was they didn't think it was viable, but we'll,
Okay. Why would-
we'll continue to monitor
Okay,
that.
I was gonna say, and they said because of the gap?
Right.
So this is the proposed income mixes for those projects. Again, the Augustine projects are about 30%, and then they have the 16, 70% AMI categories. So as we talked about, those are probably almost 700 units between the two of those communities.
When will they find out from TDHCA? Do we know
Generally, it's the summer when they announce the,
who got
yeah.
selected?
And so we're hoping to have, again, in future presentations, to have a little bit more information about each particular development and where we're at, and maybe ideally when we would hear back from TDHCA.
Okay.
So after we build the units, then we look to working with our partners to make sure they stabilize. And so there are 3 projects that have finally completed construction, and they're in the stabilization. So lots of items to do in stabilization, but we're really looking to also make sure that they're leasing up those units. And so these are projected target dates for those 3 properties. So that's really that final stage after we've gotten through construction and we've got to do all of those groundbreakings and grand openings. That's where we're at in these. So the team, and this is where it actually transitions over to our asset management department, and they are monitoring these projects and then reporting back. The only one that is not with asset management is 100 Labor, and that is actually with Beacon Communities, and we're hoping to have a grand opening here soon.
When will they start leasing?
100 Labor, they're already leasing. All of these properties are leasing. It's just when we talk about stabilization, the banks are looking for 90% and other
Right.
items that have to. Yeah. But they've been leasing for a while.
And I think the last bit of developer fee comes in at stabilization also.
Okay.
Construction is finished, right?
Construction is finished. There will be some punch list items, but overall, we have all of our certificates to occupy, and so it's just punch list items that we're waiting for.
I noticed all the fences were down and everything. It really looks nice.
You're talking about 100 Labor?
Yeah, it really looks nice.
Beautiful property. And these are the income mix there. So 100 Labor, we did transfer a project-based rental assistance program over there. So we moved one that was at a Beacon community and bringing in a deep affordability to the downtown area, which was 44 units.
100 Labor also has some commercial space, is that right?
It does have some commercial space that we are working with our management partner to get those units, or to get that space leased up. So it's a little slower than what we want, but we're working through that.
Oh, good Lord, I can't think of the name of the store now. It's over there off of Lee Street, the convenience store that had been sort of an issue for Lavaca. It's been, I guess, across from the YMCA. Is there enough space in our retail? Would we consider moving, asking them if they can pay the rent? The rent levels may be too high for him, I don't know, versus what he has today. But,
Well, we can check that to see if.
I don't know that we want a convenience store in ours, but
We're trying to manage expectations of the neighborhood. I think one of the areas we're really looking to bring in maybe a restaurant into that area, that would probably be the biggest part. And then there's some smaller retail space, but definitely something we can talk to our broker with.
right.
And I think we're also working on the parking situation for that, is that right?
We are. So part of the development, there's a piece of land that we're hoping to build a parking lot on. So we're working through that as well, which would entice restaurants to maybe rent that space if they actually had parking. So we're trying to be mindful of all the additional traffic that's coming into that neighborhood.
Well, and on a side note, Lavaca Neighborhood Association met last night, and it was all positive to Opportunity Home. So they appreciated the efforts of the Y beginning their part, the fencing around it. Their focus now is on traffic, which isn't us. So, but no, they were real appreciative of the work that this organization has done. So,
Fine.
Thank you for that.
yeah.
Can you explain real quick what PBRA is?
Project-based rental assistance. So easy terms, it's Section 8 tied to the property, but it's not project-based vouchers. It's just a different umbrella in HUD that funds, and usually most of these contracts, I will tell you, nationwide are with private landlords. And so that's the easiest way.
So I think we're trying to change our language to income-based housing so that we're communicating that an individual pays a percentage of their income as rent.
So the PBRA units can be income-based?
It's
Oh, it is
100%
income-based.
income-based. So,
Okay.
so that's a simple way. But we are trying to work on our terminology, but we also know that there are different programs that we have to make sure we highlight what they are.
Okay, thank you.
And the compliance issues are different for each program as well.
Keeps our compliance team busy, yes. So here are some upcoming pre-construction development. And so Alazan expansion, I think the board has heard a lot about that. And again, we will be coming back with a more in-depth report on Alazan with the other developments. We have Victoria Commons area, and there's like 3 different developments. So it's the townhomes, North Pond and South Pond. And those are some of our targeted construction dates for those projects to begin. So we have Alazan will be self-developed, and so we're currently working to find a GC to help us with that project, and then Catellus is helping us with Victoria Commons area. And here are some of the income mix. Well, really, it's just the income mix for Alazan. And as Ed mentioned, this one is slightly different. It is project-based vouchers. That is what we're moving forward with at this development. And then the rest we're going to be determined. So here are some of the development priorities that we've been talking with the board with for over the last couple of years. And Alazan, Lincoln, and Castellano, which you often hear us talk about, are the big 3. Because they are big 3, they do take a while. And because looking back at our development policy, we want to make sure that we're addressing and trying to meet the needs and meeting our goals in the development policy, and especially when it comes to anti-displacement. And so oftentimes those have to go into phases in order to be able to have new units going up and being able to relocate those families if they choose to stay in those neighborhoods.
In terms of timeline, can you tell me a little bit about, like, where would we be ideally? And I know it's
Timeline for all
Timeline.
of those?
Because if we've identified Alazan and we've identified Lincoln and Cassiano, we're not going to touch the other two until we get phase one done for Alazan, correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
The
and
goal is we're focused right now on Alazan expansion because we need those units to go up in order to then focus on the 501. However, they are going to cross over because once we know we're ready and the buildings start going up, we need to start having conversations with our residents to move them over. So those, we'll start seeing an overlap in those when we're trying to redevelop Alazan. Obviously, we're always balancing and challenging of funding and making sure that we have enough capacity with funding as well as enough staff capacity to be able to do those. So as the board may know, we did go out for a master development plan for Lincoln, and we're still looking at that to see, but right now it does not say that that's on our radar for at least a couple of years. But we still wanted to have conversations and start looking because these developments take years to get through, and so we want to really start thinking about where ideally we can start the redevelopment process for some of these. We're also not just talking about redevelopment, but we're also saying what else can we do in the meantime. Cassiano is also an aging property. Are there other investments we could make there? And so some of those things that we're talking with the staff, as well as we're getting additional funds from other resources to kind of do some upgrades at those sites. And so that's what we're trying to do as well. So it may not just be a full redevelopment, but is there some rehab or some other things we can do at those properties to keep them more attractive for residents to move in while we're waiting for the redevelopment to happen.
So Brandy and I met with Alamo Architects this last week regarding Lincoln, and there's an initial concept that they have come up with, and we are in the process of working with a financial consultant that does the feasibility analysis for various projects, whether it's tax credits or choice or a self-funded development. And they have to work through all those calculations, of course. It's possible that Lincoln may score well on a tax credit, in which case, we could apply for tax credits perhaps as early as 2025 or 2026, depending on how it fits into our pipeline, and then construction, of course, would start after the application and award, 6 months later or something of that sort. But right now, our focus continues to be Alazan as the top priority.
The plan for Lincoln that was done by Saldana, is all that out the door now?
So it's our understanding that the floodplain is inaccurate in the Saldana plan, and our procurement department's already in communication with them about that and what sort of remediation we will have to do in that case.
Do we have any recourse to recuperate any funds that we paid them for?
So procurement is, and
That's
Muriel
what you're
stepped out of the room, but procurement is working on that with Saldana right now. We will pursue that.
Okay.
There she is.
They've got, at the minimum, they've got an E&O insurance clause, I'm sure.
Right.
So I understand that the floodplain is bigger than what we thought it was, and it's going to affect more buildings. But the designs of the buildings that were presented and all that's out the window.
Well, the designs, they had some buildings on the new floodplain area, and that construction would not be able to occur.
With regards to timing and feasibility on our dollar, why is it possible to push this out to the development community? We don't even know that the property is ours yet at this point. So it's. I guess what I would say is, why would we occupy the bandwidth of our employees when we could go to development and say, look, if we were able to achieve, again, it's still an if. We don't know that we've got the ability to have the land. But if we did, what could you do?
Yeah.
And let them go through the feasibility, let them do it and go through the
So
expense.
the financial analysis she's doing is, will it score on a tax credit, whether it's us
Or anyone.
or a partner that's doing it. So we're not saying we would necessarily have to do it. It could be a partner, but we're just trying to understand if it would be a viable project on a tax credit application.
How long will it take for them to do this?
Yeah, I think we're going to know that in the next 60 days.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
And then, as you know, there's also the possibility of a choice grant. HUD is currently receiving more choice money than they were
Before.
in the past, so that's also a possibility.
So next up is just a quick update on our housing bond projects. And so if the board can remember, we were recipients of several dollars through the city's housing bond. And these are the projects that were awarded. I will let you all know, the board know, that executed contracts have been done for most of the projects on there, which means we brought those to the board. We did our back and forth with the city, and we've signed those contracts. There are two that we have not done that with, and that's Mid-Crown and WRI, which is our West Side Reinvestment Homes. And the only reason why there was for the west side, there were some different processes that the city was following because it wasn't just housing bond dollars. We also got awarded for another bucket, and so we're just working on that language. Mid-Crown, if the board remembers, we just recently purchased that property not too long ago, and so we are also still having to go back to HUD for approval to enter into a loan with the city. And so that has taken the staff's time to try to get that. We're working with our attorneys to make sure we have that before we actually brought that contract to the board and then went back to the city. Underwriting has been a task for all of these projects. I think Susan and her team were blessed to get through the West Side reinvestment, but these other ones have been a little on the challenging side, and that's just more where it is a combination of these underwriters are used to working with tax credits and not necessarily the rehab and a public housing authority. And then some of it is when it comes to the items that we need in the back and forth, so they want to see who our general contractors are, what all of the assessments we're doing, pro formas, and so we have gone back and forth numerous times with the underwriter. Some of the items that are still pending are just some of our procurement items that we unfortunately had to go back out because the team was not satisfied with who had submitted for those contracts. Just really was not necessarily their expertise when it came to, for instance, at Cottage Creek, we were looking for HVAC, and that's not really what we received on those things. And so we've gone back a couple of times. So some of those pending procurement items is what's holding up our underwriting. But I do want the board to understand, even though underwriting has not been completed, some of the smaller projects that can be done at the sites are happening with the understanding that the city is going to be reimburse us. And so we are in constant communication with the city. We actually meet with them monthly as a core group. And then there's individual meetings with our Assistant Director of Construction Services and our maintenance superintendents that are really having the city staff come on. They've seen the work that's being done, and we're tracking it. We just haven't actually received those reimbursements until the underwriting's completed. So next up is voucher strategy. And so I know that this did come up during the priorities that were set by the board last 2 weeks ago. And one of the questions was how are we utilizing our voucher strategy? And so I think the biggest key is balancing our voucher utilization to meet our substantially the same MTW requirements, which Diana discussed, as well as other MTW needs. And I think the key is, and I heard the commissioners say, well, don't y'all have vouchers out there that are not being utilized? It is. There's so many variables when we're talking about voucher strategies and voucher utilization, from payment standards to contract rents to vouchers that are on the streets to the actual funding that we're receiving. And so it is the whole program in itself is a strategy. And it is when you make an update to one area, it does impact the other area. And so we're constantly looking and reviewing those numbers, but we're always trying to make sure that we're stabilizing at an optimal level, right? We hear what individuals say that we're not utilizing our vouchers. We are utilizing our vouchers while we're trying to meet our other MTW needs and obligations, as we talked about in public housing and other programs, and making sure that we are committed to those resident services. We have issued or have allocated project-based vouchers to our nonprofit partners, and so that is something that we entered into a partnership with Sam's Ministry they are building their first permanent supportive housing development here in San Antonio. And so, one of those things, we know are mission oriented, and so we have allocated vouchers there. But those are project-based vouchers, but I don't want the board to think that we haven't done any other partners allocations. We really have been trying to address the homeless needs in our community for years. I want to say it's probably back in 2006 where we had partnered with Haven for Hope and issued vouchers there. And over the years, we have expanded outside of Haven. We went to the Center for Healthcare Services, to SAMS, and then we actually work very closely with Close to Home. And any new vouchers that are coming into our community, we make sure that we are partners sitting at the table, and our teams have worked together for years to make sure that we are prioritizing what the city partners have said are the homeless population. And so those vouchers, and I want to say between all of these homeless vouchers, we're probably roughly about 1,300, if not more, vouchers that we have allocated to different partners.
Okay, I've got a question on that, but let's go back to the previous slide real quick. Are we communicating this back to the city? I remember that you had received that notification. Yeah. I mean, even though we're having this monthly meetings, the city is like, wait, how come y'all haven't started? Why, and
Brandy's in touch with the city on a regular basis. I think they have a formal monthly meeting that they do. So they are aware of the status, and they are aware of what the holdup has been.
like, which ones you had mentioned we know that we're going to get the funding, so we're going through the expense right now.
Sure.
Like, which of those?
So Cottage Creek, we've done work there. We are not doing the big projects yet because those we're still waiting for the GC, but Cottage Creek, we've done some work, and I'm also committed in that big upcoming is to give y'all more updates. Pecan Hill, the structural assessment was completed, and so we got recommendations from that before we could actually do the elevator modernization. Victoria Plaza, that thankfully is moving forward. So the contractor is set to begin on April 8th. I think that's what it has up there. Wood Hill's another one where we have done a lot of little projects there. And then the big project is really windows and siding. And so that's what we're waiting for the architect there. And then the homes have been in construction as well. So really the two that work has not started at is Allison. Well, I should say building has not started. There's been a lot of work happening in the background. And then Mid-Crown and Ravello is another one.
So we're going to use that as a basis in response to the letter that they sent you? I mean.
Yes, we have been in contact with them about that, so they know the status. And I met this week with Veronica from Neighborhood Services and Ian, and we had a number of subjects we touched on, and they didn't express any concerns about this.
Any more concerns? Because they did have concerns, but they.
So when they issued the letter, I think that was standard because and Brandy's shaking her head, yes it is. It's a standard language that they have to issue because they had a timeline that they were trying to comply with.
So it was the original timelines from when we submitted our RFP back in 22 and 23 that we had committed to and trying to get there. I also know in speaking with the city, there are some developments that did not come through, and so they just didn't want that to be ours where we were returning back any money. And so we knew the letter was coming. They clearly told me, Brandy, we know we've been in communication with you and your team, but this is standard, and we just want also to see if we have to extend any of the contracts. So that's what we're working through. Okay. But we keep them up. They know the status of RFP statuses, where we're at. We've been telling them the HUD approval situation as well, and so we're trying to finalize all the documents that we know we have to give to HUD, and so there has been a slight delay there, but and some of that has been transition as well. And so we're quickly trying to address all those needs, but they are fully aware, and they did let me know the letter was coming.
Given their awards to us, when we start, I mean, we're doing what's necessary in terms of, in conjunction with, as part of, whichever. Let's make sure we do that. So at the minimum, they feel like they're getting the credit that they gave us years ago.
Part of that team actually does have their communications team, and Maribel, who used to work for this organization, is on there. So she knows what we know what she's looking for. So anytime there's big groundbreaking projects, they're going to be there. And then we're also working on the signage that actually has housing bond dollars as well.
Good. Okay. The other thing is that we've also received earmarks from Congressman Cuellar, Congressman Casar, Gonzalez. What have we started spending their funds as well, or because that's not on this list? But
Yeah, we didn't put these on the list, but yes, some of that is underway already. Some of it's still in the planning phases, and then we heard yesterday that there's a new earmark from Congressman Casar for Alazon.
$1 million, something like that.
So we're excited about that as well.
And we could also include those in upcoming. So just as the board is aware, yes, we have received some earmark. That is a whole new, those are new types of grants and takes a whole new system that HUD has set up. And anything we make sure that we're meeting those obligation and expenditure dates. They're very, very similar to our capital funds. We're also making sure the language is appropriate for how we're spending the money, because we want to make sure that we are in compliance with what the language was submitted and what we're required to do for the grant. And so I will, let the board know is our team does work on, and we do monitor those obligations. We know sometimes the elected officials don't understand the process, and so we're trying to make sure that they fully understand that, but we do have to go through a lot of document and paperwork with HUD.
Okay. Now my question on your next slide, the voucher one.
Okay.
And this might be, I guess it'll show up on your desk, but can we get something that's easier to read for us?
It's
Yes.
already in the works.
Oh, it's okay.
I am not a fan of that, and so Susan is very nicely trying to meet my needs, and so
Okay.
we're updating it.
And I've been exposed to this for years, and I still sometimes have problems following it. So yeah, thank you. That'd be appreciated. Okay, so project-based vouchers to our nonprofit, mission-oriented organizations, and equally, can we make? That's one of the other items. Can we do stuff that actually helps the development deals? Now, I am well aware how our stance used to be, and the particular problem that issuing a PVV takes it away from us, and in turn, it diminishes our capability to serve in another area. But at what cost? And
Yeah.
that's where now I'm like, well, now it's almost worth it for us, even though it's going to get a diminished return here. In the meantime, it's going to give us units, and even if it's minimal,
Yeah.
even if it's 10% at the deepest affordability.
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned I was in a meeting with Veronica and Ian this week, and one of the discussions we had was, can we use our project-based vouchers to support a project that's already viable, that has deep affordability, to increase the affordability? In other words, to deepen the affordability of a project they already have that's viable. One of the things I think Brandy and I haven't talked with the board about is we cannot award vouchers in order to fix a financial problem. That's, in other words, if a project has to be viable to begin with before we can consider it for project-based voucher award. I'm probably not saying that, Brandy, correctly, but I know you know the rules.
I wish I didn't know the rules. So it's really, it should not be utilized to cover gaps. And so traditionally when our project-based vouchers are issued, you have to go out for an RFP, and developers or whoever has to apply and compete for those. And it really should not, to its point, not fill a gap, but it should be something that is mission-oriented. If we're looking at permanent supportive housing, if we are, if they know they have a development that they're really doing some targeting work for targeted populations, we can award them. As a reminder to the board, we are working with the city through the housing bond, and so we will be able to be kind of like an advisory. So if we do see that someone is interested in having deep affordable units at their projects, then that is something that we can look at to make sure that it does align with our mission.
Right. With regards to that, do we get to vote as part of that bond process with them?
Serving in an advisory capacity, we're not actually voting up or down on a project.
So once they determine that the project may be eligible for funding, then they will let us look at it and see whether or not we would want to allocate project-based vouchers to those projects.
I was going to say, because given if we participate in that manner, it handcuffs staff and board. And if we don't have a vote situation, how about just issuing a letter? Make sure you're doing this, or at least it's our expectation. And that way we don't have to be part of it. And again, in an interest of not putting more on y'all's plate, let's back off of that. I'm happy that the city invited us, but to what expense?
Well, we can look at the options. I don't know that we've considered that as an option, but we can certainly look at it.
I was going to say, because it would only be for the next, they just issued it, so it's what, 90 days?
I think it closes mid-April.
And then
Yes.
they'll spend another 30.
They'll spend a little bit of time
Trying to go through and
evaluating
score.
it, and then they have to go to city council, and I think the lockout period ends when city council actually approves it.
Mhm.
Okay,
I was going to say suggestion.
we
so-
can look further into that.
That was part of the comments at this board. That's something if you needed us to vote on, we would be happy to do so. I think this board would, if you need that support.
Okay.
So. Sorry, no, going back to this list, the deals in development, and I go and I look, okay, we've tasked our developer partners previously with hitting certain amounts in the 30% AMI and even lower, because I see some of them have units that are even lower. And if we can't help from a PVV, because we can't close gaps for them, then maybe adjust those percentages so they can get to a higher AMI, which would then help them financially with their financing. Are we doing everything that we can to assist them with that? And just not, because some of these are well above 10% in the 30% area, and they don't need to be.
Right. Well, and they're 9% tax credits, so they have a lot more capital going in
Right.
and less debt, so they can support more deeper affordability. And that's one of the issues that we found in the past. So then, at the end of the 15-year period, there's much less debt on the property because initially there was little debt going in because of all the equity. On 4%, they're much higher leveraged, and those issues we've talked about with the board where we've had financial problems, those have tended to be the 4% because they are higher risk, they're higher leverage
Right.
from the beginning, and typically they cannot fund the deeper affordability.
Okay. So that being said, maybe we can do more, well, again, we're looking for opportunities everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what and if it means more developers, we've got a new real estate officer, so find more developers, they at least have the funding capability. Now, whether or not they can close their deals, we don't know. But I think that's what this board wants to see. Hey, we've got 10 of them, bring them. 3 or 4 or 5 of them might make it. And it still doesn't guarantee a deal. They still got to go through their paces with the state. But I guess anything that we can do in this body is what we want to do. And that's the message going forward, which is why these priorities are important to us. That'll help us financially, and at the minimum, it's going to give us more units at the end of the day. Will it be the deepest affordability sometimes? No.
Yeah.
But we serve a wide range, as you know, we discussed before, all the way up to 80%. So let's figure out ways so we can help. And some of them might be those higher AMIs within reason.
So we can definitely cast a wider net on development projects and sort through, make sure they meet our development policy. And then if there are things that are close, you know, bring them back. If there are projects that are financially viable.
No, and again, that's the conversation that you would have with the developer partners. What do you have? And they'll say, of course, you give them a mile, we recognize, or any kind of inch, they're going to take a mile. But that's why y'all get to vet it too, then bring it to us. Okay, sorry.
No. I don't know if I probably covered it, but the reduction of payment standards and amounts and policy, right? That's also another strategy to always look to see where we're setting those payment standards, and are there policies that can change to kind of help with our utilization as well as the funds that are needed to support either additional vouchers or, again, other MTW needs. So update on landlord outreach. I briefly touched on this on the last board meeting. I know Commissioner Casillas, you had asked about our landlord work groups, and so yes, that was established. It is ongoing, as I mentioned there. Some of them are some of our smaller landlords that have more of the homes on there, but a small number. And we're really trying to also look at getting some of our landlords that have the big multifamily, just so we can make sure that we are addressing needs from both, from all angles. We do participate in quarterly meetings with our partners. I think that that's also important because it's not just the work that our staff is doing, but it's also the work that our partners are doing in the community to really do that landlord outreach and recognize the need of being able to house our Housing Choice Voucher residents. We do have that multi-organization collaboration where we're engaging with HUD, the city, Bexar County Housing Authority, other partners to really figure out what is that recruitment efforts in the city of San Antonio. How do we really market the Housing Choice Voucher and show that there is a need for providing affordable housing and accepting the Housing Choice Voucher of these residents. And then I think there was there was a request for an update on how many, with that incentive that we had launched last year, how many new landlords did we add to the program? And it was approximately about 122 landlords since July of last year. We did have more payout, but those were really existing landlords just really renting to more Housing Choice Voucher. But I think that number is good when we roughly have probably about on average about 2,500 landlords, so that to have 122 since July, that's a pretty good number.
And do we have landlords that are dropping off?
That is something we can look at. I think we may have some, but that a lot of times when we see that the landlords drop off, I will be honest with you, it's usually in the multifamily, and it may be that the property was purchased and the new owner just doesn't want to deal with the Housing Choice Voucher program. They're usually from out of states, and it could be their experience with the housing authorities in the other states, and so that's where we've seen the most. But we'll see some drop off. It goes with the market, right? There's a swing right now. For the longest time, it was a landlord market because they can charge the rents. We're starting to see that slightly come down now to where maybe it's more favorable. So they use the Housing Choice Voucher program when they have low lease up and they need to get up there, and that's usually where we see that swing, and we'll get landlords that had left the program previously willing to come back because they know that it's that guaranteed rent check every month. So maintenance and resident safety plans. So again, we just, our plans and continue to be that we're always trying to manage our assets with an increasing environment. And so, Diana touched a little bit on this and where our efforts have been, where we continue to go. But our plan with both the Beacon and public housing is we're always looking at our maintenance procedures and in order to update and balance quality over cost. It's really challenging right now when we've seen increase in maintenance cost in just materials alone. I want to say it was probably anywhere between 8 to 10% in the last year, and so we just want to make sure that our team is aware of those and look, sometimes think outside the box and say, is this the best product? Can we do something differently? we are establishing the preventative maintenance plan. This has been something that has been in the works for many years, but really having a more robust plan. And I know recently our public housing team hired a maintenance superintendent just to focus on a preventative. And so really putting more efforts in there. Usually it was kind of based off of the property and the expertise of the supervisor, but really when we have a lot of big needs out there, we want to make sure that we're addressing it and having the right protocol and plan in place. We often talk about our training is more on the paperwork side, not necessarily always the training on with our maintenance tech. And so we've been launching for the last couple of years. We had an assessment where we went to where the maintenance techs were actually going into units and doing the assessment there versus just a paper interview. And so we learned from that experience. We learned to see how well they could fix the hole in a wall and stuff like that. But we also identified that they may be good at one area and not necessarily the other, and so we really want to make them more well-rounded. And so we're implementing a more robust training program specifically for our maintenance, and then some of our porters that eventually want to move into a maintenance tech role. And then we always capitalize our projects, our capital projects based off of a portfolio assessment. And so y'all have heard us talk over years that we have over $500 million needs in just public housing alone. And when we only get $16 million a year, it's hard to address. And so there's a team of us that work together to really assess based off of the information that we have to really allocate those funds there. And most of those projects are handled by Hector and his team.
Brandy, on dealing with the maintenance, I know you said it was an increase in that. Is that because of cost of materials, or is that just dealing because the lack of experience with the maintenance that's being hired?
So it's the materials, but we also recognize that there is a need to increase the staff's training as well. I mean, we have, used to be in the previous years is we wanted the jack of all trades. And we knew when we were having struggles hiring, it was a decision we made to say, if you're really good at this, let's bring you on. But we may only have plumbing issues every now and then, but at this property, we have all these electrical issues. And so we recognize we needed to train them. And so there is, I think sometimes it's, when you're learning, you may have to go back and rework. So we did see some of that, but we also recognize the need that employee was a good employee, and we're going to do this and figure out how we can train and retain those employees. So there is a combination of some of that, but mostly it's cost. Our resident safety plan. So as I had previously reported to the board, we have and we continue to do the installation of cameras, and we prioritized our senior mid-rise communities, mid to high-rise communities. We've actually have been improving our access for our emergency responders. And so as we were out there installing cameras, our contractor said, was hearing from our staff as well as some of our residents to say sometimes after hours, SAPD doesn't have access to the building, or the fire department. Fire department does, but they have a Knox box, and that is, they do not share that and give access to the SAPD. And so what we've been doing is actually installing keypads, but it's only for emergency responders. It is not, we don't give that code out to residents because it's truly meant for the access to our emergency responders. So that's going in at several of our communities as well. We're continuing to improve the lighting throughout our communities. I know we've talked about the lighting, and it's not just installing new lighting, but it's actually upgrading some of the old type of lighting to LED. And so we shared several pictures with that, and I know many of our commissioners have been out to several of our properties at night, and they can say, no, that is really lit up. So we're very pleased with the work that the team has been doing on that. We continue to repair and upgrade gates at multiple communities, so we're also exploring at some of our higher traffic communities, is there a way to put gates in really for the safety of our young kids that we know oftentimes are running and turning into parking lots just because they're having fun and don't think about cars going through the community as fast as sometimes people do. And then, of course, speed. We always love the speed humps as opportunities as well. And then we're continuing our resident property management and safe officer meetings. I think it's important that our residents hear from the safe officers. They are the ones that are responsible for the safety of not just the city of San Antonio, but actually while they're living in one of our communities as well. So this is just an update, and so some of the lighting and the camera projects, and so this is ongoing, and so, but this was some of the work that the team was able to address over the last year.
I do want to make a comment about cameras because you know I'm big about that.
Yes, sir.
When you all, and I'm happy that you all are redoing the wiring and cameras and all that, but let's try to put back at least what was there and not less. You may not be able to put more, but if you can put in what was there to cover the same areas that used to be covered would be helpful, not only to management but also to the residents. Because you're kind of putting less, so it's keeping areas from being covered to where things could happen.
Yeah, we'll definitely consider that.
The next item is our rents due from our residents. And so this is our Beacon portfolio. And so just giving a brief overview, I know that this was requested by our commissioners as well. And so in our Beacon portfolio, this is roughly about 4,000 units. We have about 686 households that have balances that are over 90 days, which is basically about 27%. And that amount for those residents, it's roughly about 2.9, which makes up about 69% of the total of the 4.2 that was as of February of 2024. The average outstanding balance for those residents is about $4,200. I'll go into a little bit more detail about our Beacon families and the actions that we've been taking.
Now I know that public housing, if it's $4,200, we know that they're not going to be able to pay that.
So this is our Beacon. These are our Beacon families, and so their income is a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was public housing.
And we'll get to public
Okay.
housing as well.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, where's the public housing?
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So with Beacon, as the board, several of our board members can remember, we did a lot of work around the outstanding debts or outstanding rents from our residents, and there was a lot of updates. And so when we knew that we needed to address the growing concern of residents not paying their portion of rent, we wanted to make sure when we established our action plan, we really thought about compassion, what we are as an organization, and also balancing perception of what we were doing. And so we did a lot of communication up front to our residents. We really tried to make sure that, every month they were still told they had a balance. We were still offering repayment agreements. We were still providing assistance with rent, helping them apply for rent relief. So whatever we can do, the staff at each community was trying to do that. When we decided to move our efforts forward, because there were still residents that were not paying rent, we established at the time a 6-tiered approach. And we began with our residents that had balances exceeding $15,000, and then we've been working our way. That plan was implemented July of last year. And so we made sure we trained our managers again what our expectations were when they were issuing those notices to vacate, as well as if they had to get to the very last part of an eviction. And so all of those, they go through a very intense review from the manager all the way up to actually the director, Melissa Garza, reviews all of those notices when we're moving to that, to make sure that as we have been communicating to the board and to the public that we have given the residents every opportunity to have some type of engagement. We wanted to make sure we were checking off those boxes. And so we started that. We started those back around July of August of last year, and we have been moving forward. took a couple, and I think the word started getting out that we were moving forward. And so as we were starting to issue those notices to vacate, many of the residents started vacating on their own without us actually having to go through, and I don't know how much the board knows in eviction, it goes all the way up to what we call a writ of possession, where we are actually moving all of their items out of a unit and placing them on the curb, and that's how it works. And so we have not had to do that in too many cases when we think about the 4,000 units that we have. And so we're quickly trying to turn those units to get residents in there. But we have been successful, and I think all of that was the communication, the really thought out tiered approach that our staff came up with, and making sure that really that was our last resort. Now, moving forward, because we're still working through all those, because we kind of took a slight pause during the holidays, that's just something that we have always done as an organization. We're mindful of losing or having to move out of your home during that time. We're finishing up at several of the communities. We had several large communities that had a little bit more, but we're actually starting our phase 2. And the phase 2 is not to where our families get back up to 15,000, but we're starting to address those families that still have yet to pay rent. And then unfortunately, we are seeing folks that just moved in that have not paid. And so we're going to make sure that we're starting to address those sooner, and then just continue our efforts. And our goal, obviously, right now, where we see that we have $4.2 million in outstanding rents, is really trying to reduce that and really just remind the residents, we want you to have a home, but it also comes with paying rent at the same time.
On the Beacon, what are your breaks? You mentioned that you've got some at the balances exceeding 15,000. Do we know the numbers? Like, how many are exceeding 15,000 right now? How many are over 10 right now?
We can give that breakout. I have a very robust spreadsheet that has all of that. So I was just trying to summarize it, but definitely we can come back with more information to the board.
Because actually what I asked for was per property, how much, if it was a large amount, this unit owed this much, and they were in arrears 5 years or whatever. That's kind of what I requested, to have a breakdown so we can understand where it's happening and how many individuals are and how much they're behind. I know you can't give us the names of the unit
Right.
numbers, but wanted it by property, both Beacon and public housing.
Definitely
So,
can give you that information. We were, for this purpose of this presentation, we wanted to summarize that, but we knew that we would be following up and sending that directly to our commissioners.
Because anyone that's behind $15,000, shouldn't have gone that far.
Understood.
Well, you recall that there was also a federal moratorium on evictions for
2 years?
the entire COVID
3 years.
period, yeah.
I know that these numbers are focused on that $15,000 or more in arrearage. Is there an existing plan, and I apologize if I just don't know, but is there an existing plan for, what's the word I'm looking for intervening in the cases where people are about to go into 20, 30 days, 60 days in arrearage of their rental payments?
So we started with the 6-tiered, and it started with the highest at 15,000, and then we went all the way down to 5,000, and it just split up into those tiers because we had to manage the staff, because it is something that if you're giving those and residents are moving out, it is work for the manager to, if we have to go to court, as well as to turn those units. And so we are along the way. So throughout, it wasn't just the 15,000, and every month we continue to give. Our protocol is, if you're late, you get a letter that says your rent was due. This is the amount that's due. So that helps. That continued to happen. We continue to do door knocks. We continue to try to call. Our goal is not to have any type of evictions. Unfortunately, it has happened in some cases, but what we're trying to do is minimize that and try to get back into the pattern where we can do that, a much quicker intervention. But right now we were addressing, this was, I think it was almost 300 residents, if I remember correctly, that had the balance between 5 to 15,000 that we were focused on, because that's how the tiered approach came in. And so as we are going through those, we know we still have some now residents that were under that 5,000 that have now, because they haven't paid the rent, are creeping up. So we're trying to address that. And then now much quickly, which is really our phase 2, is to say, we went through all this, we basically caught up with our backlog, but how do we make sure that these residents moving forward aren't falling into these same things? And so that's what we're working through as well. But throughout the time, the staff has been communicating with the residents in both programs. So this is specific to Beacon, but they've been doing the same actions in public housing as well. So in public housing, these are, we have about 1,200 families that have rent owed over 90 days, and that makes up about 62%, and their balances is roughly about 2.3%. Our current accounts receivable balance for public housing is roughly about $4 million, so that 2.3 is about 58% of that $4 million. And so again, that's about 1,200 families there. Their current balance, if we average those, is roughly about 2,300 or 2,400. And then we currently have on that program that we're able to get is that we have about 312 families that have active repayment agreements. And so that is one of the, when I go to the next slide, that is one of the criteria as public housing developed our action plan. We wanted to make sure if the residents, again, we were giving them another opportunity to enter into a repayment agreement. For the residents that have refused or have defaulted, then the actions we're going to start with those residents as well.
So staff is keeping up with those repayment agreements to make sure that they're adding that extra money for the repayment of the past due rents.
It's on their rent. If you are a resident that has entered into a repayment agreement, when you get your statement, it will show your current rent, and then it will show it actually still shows all your balance, but it shows that that amount that you said you committed to pay off the remaining debt. So it's on those, it's actually in the system. It's the beauty of the system that we use. You can see those repayment balances.
But what I'm saying is that you could have residents that just pay the rent they owe and forget about the repayment agreement. Are you keeping up with those that aren't repaying their past due?
Yes, staff is communicating with those residents that have entered into those repayment agreements because the system will let them know that they've defaulted on that agreement. So public housing, we had the plan was submitted for approval to move forward with the implementation. And so in public housing, it is slightly different than our Beacon, and we went to a 12-tiered. And the 12-tiered is beginning with the residents that have balances greater than $10,000. And so we do have several public housing residents that have balances greater than the $10,000. I want to say it's roughly about 60 households today. But also the focus is who refused to enter into a repayment agreement. And so those are going to be the first families that will receive notices that we are moving forward in the process. Again, throughout the process, and we'll continue to assist with applying for rent relief when it's open. So rent relief is not always open, but we do get notification. The team send it out. We send it out through our newsletter to say, and then we always remind our residents, we're here if you need help, because we know that those applications can be very complicated, and often sometimes they still need information from us to approve that request. The plan will be implemented in May of 2024, so we're trying to make sure that we're doing enough communication with our residents to know that we will start moving forward with our plan. And we're going to, we're still mindful of, again, how many residents at each community, because we're trying to balance that. Again, we continue to send past due notices, enter into repayment agreements. If they also say that it's about resources, we're trying to make sure that our resident service team is connecting them. We are also, looking, did their income source change? Reminding them that, in public housing, if you've lost your income, you can do a change of income that directly impacts your rent. And so we did a lot of communication before, but it's just those friendly reminders. Make sure you tell us that you may no longer have this type of income source. We will begin late fees in May of 2024, and a lot of that was also requests from our residents that have been paying their rent every month and making sure, and it's a percentage of their rent, their current monthly rent. And then upon completion of the 12-tiered approach, we will start, again, just moving forward like we did with Beacon. It's going to be ongoing, so it's not that we're going to wait till somebody's balances get that high, that we would start our process each month like we've done in the past.
I know that we're not in the business to evict people or about housing people, but if you don't pay your rent, it's not fair to the rest of us who pay religiously every month. And, you know, even though you may have a shortage of money or something, or you overspent, but still rent should be the first thing that's paid. And we need to make sure that we stay on top of this, because when you have somebody that owes that kind of money and they don't want to enter into a repayment agreement, they really don't want to pay what they owe. And the last thing I ever wanted to do when I was a property manager was evict people. And it's hard to do, especially when they have children. But it has to be done sometimes. And if other residents find out that all these people are getting away with paying rent, what's to say that they just say that I don't have to pay my rent either, because they're not going to do nothing about it. So maybe we have to make an example of some people so the others will see, hey, you know, we can't do this. That's a lot of money.
Yes, sir.
And it is, but we also need to, me coming from somebody that lived in housing under when my mom was divorced, is a lot of us are not even educated to understand even how to financially save money. So I think another thing would be to implement something that's dealing with financial classes, you know, some type of resource where we could have these single moms and parents that are constantly coming in and learning how to budget, learn how to finance, instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul. A lot of times, if they know they could get away, as Commissioner was saying, with not paying the rent, then they're going to go buy something that's not even of value anyway, and that comes with the lack of just not knowing how to budget. Is there anything in place where we're going to implement something like that's going to be implemented? And why are they refusing the repayment agreement? Is it because they're already financially unstable, they know they can't pay it, or is it just, what are y'all finding about that?
So let me answer your first one. So the financial empowerment classes, we do offer those classes. We always partner. And right now, I will say a lot of it is for our residents in the family self-sufficiency or Jobs Plus, but it is something definitely that we have talked about and explored on how do we balance that, right? You know, to Commissioner, you know, where are the interventions happening? And so we know that those were a lot of things that we did pre-COVID, and we want to bring them back, but it is something that we do have as a resource. We just try to get our partners. Right now, it's not that we can make anything mandatory, so we really tried to say it's happening at the sites, and we, you know, done a lot of a good job of trying to bring resources to the properties versus having referrals out, and so that's what we're going to continue. We know that it's needed. You're right. You know, I hear from my daughter all the time, I don't know how to budget. They don't teach me that. And so, well, let's get you in a class that does that. And so we recognize that. The ones that are refusing, some of it is just, it's, when we say refusing, it's, they're not even engaging with the staff. And so it's hard to really understand, is it the circumstance that I just don't have it? A lot of what we're finding, and I'm hearing from the team, it's more of, they won't even answer their door. They won't answer their phone. I mean, and so it makes it very difficult when it comes to that. And some, I do think it may be, I can't pay this. What makes you think I'm going to be able to pay that? So.
Yeah, what is considered, when does it become abandonment? You know, especially if you're door knocking, you notice the mail is spilling over in the mailbox and it's already been 30, 60 days. Where do they move from that as far as management if they know they just cannot get a hold of a resident? As Commissioner was saying, we know we're $15,000 in the hole. What is the process from there? I mean, how do we move forward with that?
So if it's a situation where they've abandoned the unit, we do have protocols for that, right? One of the things that we always talk about when I'm out at property and I see 15 flyers hanging on someone's door, I'm like, maybe that person's not there. We look at, you know, when was the last time we were in that unit? Did we do, you know, have they called in work orders? So things like that. If we truly think it's an abandonment, right, where we've gone in, we have to legally, by law, place an abandoned notice on their door, and then we have 3 days to make sure, and then we still have to move through a process. But that's when you have to kind of go in and see, does this really look like it's an abandoned? You know, this team does a lot of outreach. We know sometimes we'll have other residents say, they left 2 weeks ago. And so they'll tell us that, and then we try to follow up as fast as we can.
I just want to point out also, we have the situation where perhaps a resident has disposable income and they're not paying their rent, but we also have the opposite. We have a fair number of residents that are on the minimum rent payment, which is $50. In order to qualify for that, you have to have an income of about $200 a month or less. And, in some cases, they're people with families. And so we have to kind of sort through that, income levels and all of that, in order to make sure we're addressing this compassionately. If a family's earning $200 a month, to come up with a $50 minimum rent for payments is going to be difficult. But it's also going to be some of the smaller balances that we're dealing with.
What's common for public housing in terms of collection? If we've got 62% of our units that have an outstanding balance, where does that rank comparatively? Like other similar public housing authorities, they sit at what?
We can go back and do that research. I don't know that we've done that. I think over the pandemic, it grew. One of the issues I hear from some of my colleagues, and I'm thinking of one in particular that says, people not paying rent, it's our problem, but once we evict them, it becomes a city problem. And we know the cost of supporting a homeless family is very high. I think I saw some numbers that in medical costs alone, it ranges, many thousands of dollars for a homeless individual. So then it becomes a city problem. And so that's the dialogue that I've had with some of my colleagues. But we can certainly go back and do the research and report back to you what's happening at other housing authorities.
At 38% collection rate, no organization should do that. And I understand it. But when we're facing shortfalls, that's taking away monies from other families that are doing their part, or at least a portion thereof. We talked a little bit about evictions in the Beacon. Why are we not doing it on public housing? We need to. And if there are, again, there's 12 tiers versus 6 tiers at the Beacon side, find that point at whatever that amount might be. We're at 10,000, greater than 10,000. Maybe it's at the 5,000 mark, and find the most egregious families. And if we can't figure that out, then this organization, I think we owe it to the people on our wait list, because how many times do we keep saying our wait list is growing? It's time for those families to go, and the families that are on the wait list now have an opportunity to come in who might be paying rent regularly. At the minimum, it gives us an opportunity to help people that are just waiting, because we got to think about them too. And I understand we have to be compassionate, and there's a way for us to do so compassionately. I said it before, if CPS can do it with theirs, we can do it with ours. And the unfortunate thing is that even in those families that have such, that are the most vulnerable, we'll have to do something in conjunction with our nonprofit partners. These families are going to come to you, but we can't sustain their properties. The fact that they're not paying, that takes away from security, it takes away from safety, it takes away from what other programs that that Diane listed earlier. It's taking away from those. And I think that it's now time, especially if we're doing it if we're doing it for Beacon, we should be doing it for public housing. Full stop. They're both equal in terms of the families, and we should start those collection and or eviction process.
So the staff recommendation is that we begin May 24. So we're going to be giving out, again, making sure that we're communicating to our residents that these are going to start, and if we have to get to that point, May of 24 is when they may.
Is that because that's how much time y'all need to be ready, or is it because why that? Why not next month? Why not this month?
Yeah, I think in addition to advising the residents, and warning them
type of thing.
to prepare them, we also need to coordinate with our partners to make sure they're prepared. And
I challenge to try to bring up that timeline. We can do that in 30 days probably, by the end of April. And an unattended or maybe an intended consequence will be, oh, they're starting. And then all of a sudden, maybe they will sign these repayment agreements. Maybe they will fulfill a portion of whatever they have. Don't know. I mean, Commissioner Casillas is correct. Housing should be there first. That's what, that's our priority, so it should be theirs too.
And I think because I think they do it because we don't do anything about it. So maybe if we start letting them know that something's going to be done, then maybe they'll start thinking about contacting staff.
Understood. We will look at the timeline and see if it's something that we could start sooner.
so we'll target, as you're suggesting, we'll look at the timeline and target April.
I mean,
I just want to remind the board, and some of it, and this just could be, we are required to do a 30-day notice. So when we say May, it's because that's when the further action, right? So we're notifying in April, but
They're implementing it.
right,
They can't
the direct
start.
impact's really like in May.
And that's law.
Okay.
Okay.
But we could still, well, y'all figure it out.
We will.
Sooner the better.
Yes, sir.
Okay, before we go into the next presentation, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Okay, thank you.
You want to bring us back in?
Putting the chocolates.
Oh. Well, does she have to announce it though?
Hello, the time is 3:07. Opportunity Home San Antonio's Operations and Real Estate Committee has returned from recess.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I know the board requested a communications plan on how we're going to discuss our housing bond funds and additional funds we receive as an organization. I'd like to give a spin to this. I think when we talk about communication, we're talking about relationships. So I'd like to think of this as a communication/relationship plan, because it all comes down to relationships, whether it's with city officials, elected officials, community leaders, journalists, and other members of the community, including neighborhood associations. They all factor into this larger communications plan. So I think the goal here is to continue our robust communications plan with local, state, and national stakeholders. I know the chairman mentioned earlier that it was important to give credit to the city, and he's right. We owe it to the taxpayers to give them an overview of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and a timetable, and we've been doing that. We've been doing it through all of our digital channels. We've been doing it through those relationships I just mentioned. We have a seat at the Housing Commission board, and we've been providing those updates the last 2 meetings. We'll be providing an additional housing bond update next week. All of our housing partners are there. NHSD is on that panel. The mayor's office is there. So we've been providing regular updates for the last few months, and we'll continue doing so. When we have neighborhood association meetings, for example, we had a meeting just last week with the Beacon Hill Neighborhood Association. This comes up, and we provide updates. When we meet with our community partners, when we support community events through our sponsorship, we communicate what we're doing, not only on the housing bond, but elsewhere. And that has shown dividends, right? Because the city entrusted us in providing these funds, and we're delivering. The Congress has funded us millions of dollars through the community project funding. Most recently, as our president mentioned, in the last 10 days, we received almost $1 million for Alazan and another $1 million through Representative Castro for 2 of our properties in the northwest quadrant of our city. Just a few months ago, we received another $1 million from our city council, which is unheard of, that will directly impact capital improvements for our properties, but that all happens because of relationships. And so whenever we do request additional funds, which we're going to do with the Congress, we're going to do it again in 2027 when the next housing bond application opens up. It all comes down to relationships. So when I think of communication, I think of relationships, and all of us have those. Brandy mentioned the landlord workshop. Those are relationships that her and her team are working on with landlords around the city, with the city officials. Everyone on the EOT, everyone in the senior staff, everyone in our staff are always communicating to our external partners, whether they're residents, whether they're community members, whether there are community service partner organizations. We're all communicating what we're doing. So it's robust. With that, could we do better? Absolutely. We can always improve. And we're going to do it, I think, several ways. One is with our first ever app, mobile app, which will communicate what we're doing, not only to our residents, which is really important, but also to the greater public and to our stakeholders. It's all about digital communication now, and almost the traditional legacy media of television and news, television and newspapers and websites. It's almost like journalism of yesteryear, right? It's all about digital apps now, and it's about podcasting. We launched our podcast, our national podcast last year. Of the top 100 government podcasts, we just found out yesterday we're at number 44 in the nation. That's important when we're going to the Hill. That's important when we're going to the council. And our biggest opportunity now, huge opportunity, is when we go to Austin and our state legislature. That's the biggest hurdle. And I think what we've learned with the Congress, what we've learned with the whole housing bond, right? Working with our community partners and having a robust advocacy campaign to tell the city and others that we need the city to partner with us and provide housing bond funding. That produced positive results. with the state legislature starting up again in January, and actually the sausage making, if you will, is happening now until October when the bills are being written. We're doing the same thing with our PHA housing partners from around the state, including the biggest PHAs, Dallas, Austin, El Paso, and Houston, and working as a coalition and going to Austin and telling our state House reps and senators that their constituents are our constituents. We're working for the same families here, and there needs to, the status quo of not providing funding is no longer going to be tolerated. They have an obligation, as we have an obligation, and so the practice of yesteryear no longer applies. And so I think speaking as one voice is really going to produce positive results, as it has locally, as it has federally, and so we hope to see the same thing with the state advocacy. We're doing a lot on community relations. We have robust relationships with many of our community partners, but again, there's an opportunity to expand that. You know, where are the gaps? And right now we're doing a across the board assessment. We're doing a SWOT analysis, looking at the various gaps and how we can streamline the community relations work that this organization is doing. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing, but we're supplementing that additional work with what we are already doing in relationship building. So as we move forward, yes, a communication plan is important, but I just want to reiterate that when we say that, we really mean relationships. And whenever we talk to someone, whether it's a city council meeting, a community meeting, a neighborhood association meeting, at the airport, at the grocery store, we're speaking on behalf of the organization. We're all spokespersons. And so it's really important that those relationships are maintained and we're all on the same page and what we need to convey to all of these external parties. I think we've seen great successes with the legacy media that I mentioned. Almost 90% positive coverage. We'll continue working on that, and that's important. We don't want to forget about radio, television, and newspapers, but there's this huge opportunity to move over to the digital side and also build coalitions with our state partners and our national partners. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing. We'll continue to highlight on the local level what we're doing with the housing bond. And again, we have a seat at the table at the Housing Commission. We have a seat at the table with the various city council committees. They call upon us to provide information. We provide that. The chairman has his own newsletter that goes to elected officials locally and regionally to convey what we're doing. We convey what we're doing with the board as well on a weekly basis. We convey to thousands of our community members that are part of our various newsletters. We convey what we're doing to our residents, thousands of residents who receive both a bi-weekly electronic newsletter and a monthly printed newsletter with their statement. And we have ongoing conversations with everyone else in between. So it's robust. We'll continue making it even greater. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is the app live already?
No, it's in the planning
Okay.
stages. We're working with IT and other departments, operations support and others to make sure that it's exactly what we need and what we want. And so it's going to take a while to get there, but we want to do it right. And so it's in the early phases at this point.
Thank you.
No, you're good. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, good afternoon. This section is focused on strategic plan outcomes that are focused on resident satisfaction. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we're actually advancing resident satisfaction and how we set the targets for those particular outcomes. We'll be focusing on the strategy side of the level of the plan, so we're sitting right below the mission, but above the tactics, so we won't get into the details of day-to-day activities. But before we get into that, I just wanted to share with you our learning path when it comes to thinking about targets that are appropriate for resident satisfaction, because this is something that we've had to learn over the past few years. When we started in the previous strategic plan, starting in 2012, we did not have resident surveys as part of the strategic plan. So this question never came up until 2020, when we started to incorporate feedback from residents into our strategic plan, and they became key indicators. And then we had to ask ourselves, well, what are the appropriate targets for how do we know that what do we want to shoot for? And for me and for others, the starting point was, well, why not 100%? Why not? We want all residents to feel safe. We want all of them to live in quality homes. Why not 100%, right? And we recognize now that's a very aspirational goal. That's something that describes where we want to be. Eventually, it's almost a visionary goal, because 100% is never realistic. But it's definitely long-term in nature, right? Over next 5, 10, 20 years, that maybe that's something that we can use to align our work. But as we started getting more data, as we established the baselines, as we took a couple more measurements, more surveys came in, we started to get a better sense of what the actual, where we were starting, right? So in some cases, the baselines for our questions were 60%, they were 70%. And so that raised the question, well, we're a little ways off from 100%. So how do we measure progress in the meantime? How do we get there? What is a more reasonable approach? And so in July of 2023, we sat down with the senior team and we had a series of work sessions, a series of exercises to define what our targets could be. Well, what are the good numbers that we can discuss and without any particular context? So we called that the headline value, and we ended up with goals that range from 80 to 85%. And then as time went on, between 2023 and today, I think we've established some pretty strong trends for each of their outcomes. Our survey methodology has been refined, and we've done additional research, right? How are other organizations that are measuring customer satisfaction, what do they look like? What are their expectations? What are their targets? And so and I'll share those with you in just a second. But I think where we've ended up today is with a series of targets that are attainable. They're based on where we started and reflect incremental and attainable growth. So one of the places we started to look for comparables and benchmarking was apartmentratings.com. And they would tell us for the city of San Antonio, what is the average rating of a community in San Antonio? And the average rating is 3 out of 5 stars in the way that they measure things, which is equivalent to about a 60% satisfaction rating. So that's what the average renter thinks of where they live in San Antonio. So that was something to think about. And then we also discovered the American Customer Satisfaction Index. This index tracks public and private sector customer satisfaction across a number of industries. But they've been doing it since 1994, so they give us a good sense of what customer satisfaction looks like. And so you can see from this particular graph, in 1996, they had a low of nearly between 70 and 71%. They're on a scale of 100 as well, so that's also a benefit. And on the high end is actually their most recent measurement, fourth quarter of 2023, when they measured a satisfaction index of 77.8. So that was a record high for that index. Now, recognize that this is, again, sort of an agglomerate of public, private sector, multiple industries. So some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. And they do have additional information for, say, the federal government. And there you can see historical trends that go from 63.4 at the low end and a high of 72.3 in 2006. that give you a sense of what the range of satisfaction looks like for the federal government. And they also drill down a little bit and provide satisfaction indices for specific federal departments. So this allows us to see, for Treasury, for example, has the low satisfaction rate of 54, and in Department of Interior, a high rate of 75. So 75, again, is the high. So this gives us, a sense of the ballpark in which we are playing when we're looking at satisfaction, resident satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and what is reasonable to expect when we're looking at our own. And so let's look at our own for a second. So these are our priority outcomes. The three in the box are the outcomes that are closely related to resident satisfaction. Residents feel safe, residents live in quality homes, residents have meaningful housing choice. And they're, two of those are active, one of those is on hold. And I can tell you, let's go through each one, and I can tell you a little more detail about the actual plan for over the next, the current plan to move forward with these. So currently, 71% of residents feel safe. And this is pretty good. It's met our expectations for the year, and matches our expectations for the 5-year target that we set. It started out at 66%, it dipped to 65 in our December of 22 measurement. It had a high of 73% in June. So we have a sense of this is something that's slowly been increasing with some ups and downs over the years. The next level down, if you ask what are our strategies to help residents feel safe, there are 5 that are in the plan right now. Improve safety measures so that residents feel less vulnerable at night, and we heard from Brandy some of the work we're doing on that front. We're also developing strategies around social cohesion, centralized data management, protect residents and employees from other residents' criminal activity, and educate residents to protect themselves. If we can go down one more level if we look at focus on improved safety measures and get a sense of what we are doing to improve safety measures. And there's 3 strategies in the plan at this level. These are department-specific strategies. So for public housing, for Beacon, and then one specific plan at OP Schnabel that's we started working on and then was put on hold until next fiscal year. Otherwise, the other ones are active and on track.
It was on hold because of funding or?
Because of funding, yeah.
Primarily?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was in many cases, we start work on something and priorities get shuffled in the middle of the year, and so this is one of the ones that got bumped till next year.
So, and this is directly impacted by our expenditure. Of course, if we spend more money on security, more money on lighting, more money on, those things that improve resident satisfaction.
Then we're taking it away from somewhere else.
Right.
Rich, on that 71%, how is that broke down? I mean, who's doing the surveying for us to know that 71% is close to being accurate? I mean, of all the properties, who's taking the survey, or how is this conducted?
So we are, we've worked very closely with UTSA to develop a survey methodology that's a random sampling methodology. When we first started doing the surveys, we tried to blanket everybody and get as many different responses as possible. Our most recent survey was sent out with the new methodology, which was random sampling, so that we make sure we get an accurate, a proportional representation of the households that we serve across the portfolio. And so that's the measurement, that's the methodology we're using. We do it twice a year for residents, we have the UTSA team has been great in terms of providing us feedback during the preparation phase, and then they also reviewed our results and provided feedback at that point as well. Where residents live in quality homes, the trend is a little different. We started out at very high at 77%, dropped to 57% in December of 22, and we're back up to 70% of residents are satisfied with the quality of housing. This is, again, meets and exceeds our expectations, not just for this year, but for the 5-year target. There are 5 strategies that we are pursuing to improve housing quality. Landlords maintain units so that they pass inspection without final fails, effectively address work orders, prevent unscheduled avoidable issues, ensure partnership property quality is maintained over time, and extend useful life of existing assets through the capital improvement plan. And I'll talk about the 2 in the box for the next level of detail. How are we helping landlords pass inspections? The strategy there is to create how-to videos for successful completion, and those are on track and having a good impact. How are we addressing work order effectiveness? Here, we set up some training and programs that we started to work on some training programs this year that have been put on hold for next year as well. So these are that's the blue box, and then the gray one is a new strategy that is in development to ensure that the vendors we work with perform to meet expectations and have a good working relationship with residents and employees. For residents who have meaningful housing choice, we see we started out at a very low 65%, and the most recent survey result is 76%, which is exceeding our expectations for this year, for this survey cycle, and is well on our way toward our 5-year target. Here, the strategies are, they're 5 as well. Residents have the resources to make informed decisions. Residents have the resources to follow through on their decisions. Residents' options include a significant supply of units affordable to 30% AMI households. Waitlist households options include a significant supply affordable to 30% AMI, and residents' options include high-quality neighborhoods and neighborhoods of their choice. Now, most of these are on hold because we are revisiting the whole framework of housing choice and how we want to move forward and implement this. And the one that's in development reflects an understanding that we serve not just our current residents, but also folks that are on the wait list, and that our decisions impact their choices as well. So, in summary, I think we are, as far as resident satisfaction trends going, the resident trends are positive. They meet and exceed our goals in general. The targets that we've set for the future for the next 5 years are attainable. They're not moonshots, they're not stretch goals, they're not status quo, but they are things that we can work towards on an incremental basis. And the benefit of having those attainable targets is that it allows us to be nimble. We can balance competing needs and switch direction, put things on hold if we need to and come back to them without undermining our other efforts. And it doesn't require dramatic reductions in other services or outputs. So we feel pretty good about the way that things are currently set up. If we were to make any drastic changes to the targets, it would have a ripple effect on other things.
So one of the ripple effects is if the board was interested in more stretch goals quicker, that would obviously create more investment in that area. For example, improving resident satisfaction would require investment, additional investment in maintenance, people, probably systems, replacing the current system, and then also in security and additional security. And that's one way we know we can drive the number of resident satisfaction up is additional investment. But that also comes at a cost, a trade-off.
To something, right.
Right.
Well, and rather than, I think these are good. I mean, but we're, how long have we been sitting at 70, 71? That's our, our long-term, our stretch goal at 67 on that one item. Do you believe that that implementing this plan will then allow it to take it up further? I mean, we need money in order to do some of these initiatives, but would you be using this same plan if we now said, how do you get to 80%? Or how do you get to 85%? Is that even attainable? I mean, and again, it all costs money. We recognize that too, but that's also part of the reason why we push. What else can we do where you have those funds available to you? So, but that's good.
One of our goals has
No.
incremental improvement over year, built into it. So if we find that we're already at achieving a level, we'll want to adjust that as well
Okay.
to continuously improve. And I think that's sort of built into our system. If we're consistently, not as a blip on the chart, but
Sure.
consistently beating something, we'll want to reevaluate that target.
All right. The next section looks at, provides an overview of our wait list. There are actually 83 wait lists and 113,329 unique households on those lists as of March 1st. 3 of the wait lists are open, 80 of them are closed, meaning that they're not taking any new applicants. A majority of the households are on 1 or 2 wait lists, and the chart shows what percentage are on how many households. So 36% of applicants are on only 1 wait list, 23% are on 2, 11% are on 3, et cetera.
And the number of counting, though, they don't get double counted.
Correct. Yeah,
Page that shows the wait list overview.
Right.
We have actually 318 families on 18,000 families on all our wait lists. But if you remove all the double counting, it's 113 unique.
You know where I'm
families.
going with this, is that,
Right.
hey, are you scrubbing
If
it?
we're just counting them once, it's 113,000. And that number, I would like to point out, we looked at the trend over the last few years. That number is growing about 1,000 families per month, which is unbelievable. And I think that reflects the need in the city. The need continues to grow, as we know, over post-pandemic and over the recent years. And that's a concerning trend. And I've started talking about that trend with the city and some people at the city. So that's a number I think you'll be hearing more about. Our wait list is growing at roughly 1,000 families per month.
And are y'all still working on, when can we see the numbers on how it's segmented? Like,
We're about to see that.
okay, we're about to do it.
So this is the timeline that Ed was mentioning. This one goes back to 2017, and you can see at that point there were 54,000 households on the wait list. Today we're at 113. So this tracks the growth, and a lot of which has happened in the past year, been dramatic growth over the past year. Now, the number of wait lists per household has declined. In 2021, there on average, households were on almost 4 wait lists. Today, it's just under 3. So we can drill down into the various wait lists. We've grouped them so that by kind of wait list, so you can see a little bit, and we can compare and contrast. So this is self-reported income, what they tell us they earn when they apply. And there's a somewhat of variation. Those are on the tenant-based lists. Those are the housing choice voucher and other voucher lists have an average income of $4,000, just above, while those on MOD or PBV lists are over $10,000. The chart on the right, however, translates that information into area median income. So the dark blue is extremely low, that's 30% AMI. The turquoise, very low, is the 50% AMI, and the yellow is low, which is up to 80% AMI. And so the vast majority of the households on all our wait lists are extremely low income, 30% AMI or less, 84%, 85%, up to 94% of the wait lists are extremely low income households. The family type is kind of evenly split. You see the top two are the accessible units and the elderly mixed public housing. The family type on those lists are elderly or disabled, or both elderly and disabled for the most part. And the rest of the lists are tend to be 76, 74% family types. Family size varies quite a bit by list, at least in terms of the numbers. So on the low end, we have 1,700 households applying for accessible units, and on the high end, you have 49,000 households on the mod lists. But if you look at the proportions, they're roughly the same across all the lists. There's not too much variation between family size from list to list. In fact, a plurality of each list is a one-member family. And if you combine the one and the two-member families, that makes up the majority of every single list. So, and if you put them all together, the bulk of the households that are on our wait list are one-member and two-member families. We can calculate wait time as well, and we can see the chart on the left shows that a lot of variation in wait time, from less than a year for some of the lists, like the tenant-based lists have half a year is the average wait time, to 6 years more or less for the PBV lists. The chart on the right kind of takes that information and shows it in a slightly different way. That this one shows the percent of households by list group and wait time. So in the dark blue is the percentage of households that have been waiting less than a year. The turquoise, they've been waiting 1 to 2 years. In the yellow, 2 to 5 years. And in the green, more than 5 years. So for lists like the accessible units and the elderly mix, the family public housing, the tenant-based lists, the vast majority of households on those lists have been waiting less than a year, or up to less than 2 years for sure. The three lists on the bottom tell a different story. There, the majority of households have been waiting 2 to more than 5 years.
Where do y'all track the percentage of households that come off the list? Well, we know that you said it grows by 1,000, but does that assume how many did we lose off the same month?
So I think probably the most active draws is happening out of Section 8. And so there's a process. We call people off. They have to verify their income. It may be that after they've put their name on the list, they've now found other arrangements and no longer want the housing, so they may drop off the list that way. We find that there's a number of people that don't show up for the appointments, and perhaps it's because of some sort of criminal history and things of that sort.
And when that happens, we drop them off the list.
We drop them off the list unless they can reapply if they choose. But so there's a number of that happening as well.
And what's that number?
It's a fairly high percentage. I don't know
70?
Recently. No, I would say more like 50 or 40%. But it looks like Brandy may have some information.
I was trying to multitask. So the Section 8, when we were calling folks off of there and actually who respond, is that, because there's a difference. So yeah. Section 8, when we were in lease-up, which we usually are we monitor our success rate. Everything's based off of success rate. Obviously, with it being a newer wait list, we know that we're more successful reaching out to those families. And so if we know we need maybe 100 vouchers, we need to help with the utilization, we're pulling 1,000 people off the wait list. Just based off of success rate from when they get approved all the way up to when they're actually going to get, we actually have an active contract.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to vary even in public housing. So depending on how many units we need to fill, and we are always constantly looking at success rates, like with our elderly, with our family, and so there may be times where we do a much smaller pool because we only need about 500 to fill 40 units. So it's a math. It's a moving target. So it's based off of our success rate, based off of an age of a wait list, based off of the needs that we have to fill.
And in some cases, we cannot reach the individual because their contact information has changed, their phone number or email has changed, and I know that's happening as well.
Right, and that's where you'll often hear us talk about we're going to do a maintenance update. I will tell you, industry standard, you really want to keep a wait list 1 to 2 years because we know our families move a lot. And so oftentimes in some of these numbers where the staff is actually undergoing some wait list maintenance and reaching out, we send letters, and if they don't respond, then we pull them off. And that's even before they get to an eligibility appointment because we really want to work with good data.
Okay, so help me with your percentage again. So you'll pull 1,000 people off for 100 vouchers?
At sometimes. I think right now our last success rate was, Katie's not in here. I want to say it was, oh, there she is. What was the success rate for vouchers? It was 5%. So that was at the low. That's really bad. That's a lot of work to pull somebody off if we're only getting 5% of those families that actually come into and get a voucher and lease up. That's the critical piece, and lease up.
And how can we, what's within our control to increase that?
What's in our control is making sure that we're constantly doing maintenance updates on all of our wait lists and making sure that residents know they must keep updated information with us. We're also still exploring ways to not just old snail mail, but how else can we communicate through emails, through not necessarily phone calls don't really help unless we do like a robocall kind of thing, but text messaging, we're also exploring those pathways to be able to reach out to them. But the critical piece is you have to answer that. And so we know oftentimes with our partners, I think one example is Haven, right? When someone goes to Haven's campus, they put them on any of our wait lists that we have open. They use the Haven's address. So if they get housed, by the time they get housed with us and they never update it, they're missing that. And so we work with Haven and say, look, we're about ready to do a wait list, and we know we have probably 50 people that are going to be here. Please do some outreach or make sure that they're updating their information. So we're trying to, there's always room for improvement, but that's a lot of what we have to do is that constant update your information.
And public housing, same thing, 5%?
Same thing. It's going to vary in public housing just because we have multiple different wait lists. I know that in the wait list that we fully exhausted, so the newer your wait list, the more likely you're going to be able to reach out to those families or get those families to respond. The older the data.
Oh, okay, yeah. The newer the data, okay.
The newer the data is, those folks are more likely to respond. The older, and that's why, and I know this doesn't go through all of that, but that's why it's constant to try to make sure that we're working with the most recent data. I think what was critical with the Section 8 is having where we started capping and saying we're only going to have X amount of families in a lottery system because we knew that that's on average it would take us probably about 2 years to work through that. And so that's where you get successful in kind of that wait list data.
Okay, thanks.
And those vouchers that come back to us from people that don't use them or lose them or whatever, are they offered right away to the next people in line?
So usually we're putting a lot of vouchers on the streets because we know what we're trying to get to as a utilization target. So you're always going to have vouchers, folks searching because I think Ed mentioned earlier, right? We also have people leaving the program, and so we're making sure that we're meeting all of those targets, and we're trying to monitor that STS target that we talked about, right? So it is there's constant pulls from a wait list, whether it's in Section 8 or whether it's public housing, because we're trying to make sure we're doing everything we can to get those units leased or those voucher utilization. So you're always have any program, you're always going to have more people coming off of a wait list than the need just because we see the success rate in actual lease up in any public housing or housing choice voucher program.
I think another way to communicate with a lot of these people, because phone numbers or they do change address, is a lot of people don't change their Facebook or Instagram. So you have Instagram direct messaging or Facebook Messenger that you could possibly get in contact with people. So that could possibly be another way to be in contact with them.
That is an excellent idea, and I don't think any of us ever thought about that. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Yes.
And so finally, just we can also point out where folks are applying from, and we have one application from every state in the United States, and also from Guam and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Now, having said that, most of them do come from Texas. 82% of the applicants are have a Texas address, followed by 4% from Illinois, 2% Louisiana, 2% from California. Top cities are San Antonio, Chicago, and Houston. And the trend over time has actually, we're seeing an increase in numbers. That's the gray part at the bottom of the charts, an increase in applications from other states. It's a slight increase for now, but probably something we want to keep an eye on.
Richard, go back to that previous page, or top zip codes.
Uh-huh.
What's going on there? 78207, 78223, 78228.
So those are the top zip codes in the San Antonio area. Well, overall, that we're so 7% of the applicants are coming from 78207.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, because those are considered the most impoverished zip codes in San Antonio. So I know 78228 has like a 20% poverty rate, and I know 207 is about close to 30. So, okay, so that's where most of it's coming from.
That's where the most applicants are coming from.
So we're the largest city in the United States with people on a wait list? Or is that in the state? No, because you have San Antonio, Chicago, and Houston. So
We're the top source of applicants. When we measure it by cities, San Antonio is the city that generates the most applicants on our wait list.
So it has the most need.
So it's possible need-based, but also what happens is lots of housing authorities have a policy of closing all their wait lists, and because they know it's going to take X amount of time to get through all of this wait list, and many housing authorities don't normally keep their wait lists open. So that's another factor.
Oops, wrong way. But we are seeing a growing number of applications from other cities. So where we had in 2017, 72% of applications were from San Antonio. As recently as this month, 65% were. So we've seen a drop of applications from San Antonio and a corresponding increase from other cities. And with that, I'll hand it over to Muriel.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Going to give you information regarding our upcoming HUD review and also our past HUD review. So for the previous HUD review we had, they came in August of 2014, and the objectives were to assess the current financial operations and the conditions of the authority, and to perform a trend analysis to identify any unusual financial trends that could impact the financial viability of the authority. And the results of the review indicate that the authority is complying with its Moving to Work program requirements. And the review also of the financial condition noted the following: that the overall financial condition is sound, with most public housing properties being financially stable. And then they did identify that several public housing properties are in financial distress. And then some properties in the Beacon portfolio have experienced financial problems, causing them to borrow from the Central Office Cost Center. So to address these, the authority created the Asset Management Department and performed a comprehensive physical needs assessment, financial analysis, and review of all properties to make the properties financially viable. And so one of the things we also want to point out is that as a Moving to Work entity, we are able to help uplift our properties that across the various portfolios. And I think that's something Ed mentioned earlier on, is that we do have that fungibility. So us having some properties that may need some help is not unusual for a moving to work agency. But as I indicated, we did do some things to try to improve the financial viability of the properties that were having some distress issues. So we have an upcoming HUD review. So on February 5th of this year, we were notified that HUD will be performing a comprehensive compliance review the week of May 13th through the 17th. And that was to determine if our organization complies with program requirements and regulations. And so what we're going to have is a review team from the San Antonio Field Office and a representative from the HUD MTW office to review the organization's documentation. And during the on-site review, the team is going to interview key stakeholders such as management staff, the Board of Commissioners, and residents as well. And upon completion of the review, the team will produce a report to summarize the results and share it during the exit conference. And at this exit conference, the HUD is requesting that the board chair be present along with key staff. The review team will provide a written report to the organization within 45 business days of the exit conference. Now, what is a comprehensive compliance review? So includes reviewing our operations, management, financial condition, physical condition, and our governance. And so these procedures are not considered an audit for expressing an opinion on a financial statement or financial statement reporting. So Opportunity Home has multiple financial audits annually and compliance audits annually that do express opinions. And then upcoming, we will get some of those results and see the statuses of some of those, but we have multiple financial reports that do express opinions regarding our financial statements. And then, so that was just an aside. The goal of this review is to be a helpful on-site visit where HUD staff assesses the PHA's program performance in compliance with HUD requirements and regulations. There are going to be both entrance and exit conferences, and both staff and board members are welcome to attend. Once we get those times, we do know the dates because of the week, but once we get those times, we will send that out to allow any board members that would like to attend to be there. And then the areas of the review include, but not specifically limited to, governance, all of our housing programs, and also procurement. So does anyone have any questions either regarding our past HUD review or the upcoming HUD review? Richard wore you down, didn't he?
Best guess, how do you believe we're going to
So as an organization, we are very good at compliance because it's what we do day in, day out because of the regulatory requirements, TDHCA requirements, HUD requirements, et cetera, and all the different housing programs we have. We have an annual compliance audit by our external auditors, and sometimes they may come across a document missing from a file or something like that, but to my recollection, we've never had a major weakness in our system of internal controls or anything of that sort. In addition to that, we do a lot of compliance auditing by our internal audit and compliance group, and so I hope I don't regret saying this, but being very
I'm writing
good,
it down.
being very good at compliance as an organization, has the benefit that these types of audits usually turn out pretty well. So I'm optimistic about it.
Do you think reserves are going to rear its head during the audit?
I think after our last meeting with the Deputy Secretary, that conversation has not come up. She seemed very pleased that we had actually been, and she used the word brave, to post those numbers on our website so
Right.
that they're public information. Our reserves are committed. The new funding bill that was recently passed also protects reserves for MTW agencies for the next 10 years. So that's now part of a statutory protection. So we believe and hope that the focus on that continues to decrease.
Then as quickly as we can deploy them, do it. Because that's what,
Right.
that way they can't keep him coming back to the same thing. Okay, sorry.
Okay. So next are the board calendars. So hopefully y'all received these from Marissa. I had her resend these out. So this is what they look like. Let us know if this gives you the type of information you were hoping to receive, or if there are any enhancements you'd like to see. We're coming up on April, so we're going to get actually an update regarding the independent auditors report, and then also, as you just heard, Richard's MTW agency plan. Because of the time frame between the public hearing and the actual approval, it looks like we're going to move, when we bring the MTW plan back, it's actually going to be at the May 1st board meeting, because they need to have at least 15 days. And next week is our board meeting for April because of logistics. So just want to let you know that's late breaking news.
Gotcha.
And then this one is the recurring board items for update. So we bring items to you on a regular basis, different types of items. And so these are some of the recurring board items that we bring. So any types of, like I said, any enhancements, anything we can do better, just let us know.
Any additional questions?
This presentation, can we get it to the 3 board members that are not here?
Yes. And what I was actually thinking about doing, since this is recorded, we can send them the recording as well.
Okay, yeah.
I know there was a lot of information here, Commissioners. We spent 3 hours going through this. I hope you found it helpful. And thank you for your time and questions. And
No,
we have
and
a few.
we appreciate it. At least I do. I know that's it's difficult to go mid-year and then pivot when all of a sudden now we've identified 5 areas that are important to us. So thank you, staff, and sorry for the extra hard work, but it'll be ongoing. And it's not a future plan; it's a now thing, because we have to impact those numbers today, which is why we keep asking, hey, let's see this, let's see this. Those things are important to us, money-wise and organizational-wise. We want to. It's this board's comments where we want to protect the viability, and these are steps that we believe that will do that. So.
Yes, thank you to the staff once again for putting this together in 2 weeks' time, and we appreciate it. It was a lot of information, and we still have this to be able to go over it. I still want those numbers with the past due rents that the board would like to have. Hopefully, you may not have it by next week, but if you could have it as soon as possible, we'd appreciate it.
Definitely. Thank you for all the hard work that was put into this. And we need to fix that clock in the back. That time is messing me up. It's showing 3 o'clock. But these 3 hours were well worth it. I've been in church services longer than this, so I'm good.
A lot of preaching, huh? All right, we will go back to item number 3, the public hearing. Richard?
All right, so this is a preliminary presentation and public hearing. So we'll streamline the slides and open the public hearing. I think we've already actually touched on a lot of this in the other slides, so I will zoom past it. Just a reminder that MTW provides two kinds of flexibilities to us: regulatory and funding flexibilities. That fungibility, there's the funding flexibility, allows us to create to treat MTW funds as kind of one budget. But in exchange for that flexibility, we are asked by HUD to use that flexibility to advance one or more of these three statutory objectives: cost efficiency, housing choice, or self-sufficiency. That we started the planning process, well, the typical planning process starts in October, in the fall, where we solicit feedback, integrate ideas from the strategic plan, consulting with resident councils. We post for public comment in February and then solicit feedback through that time period and then through the public hearing that we're having today. We are, as Muriel mentioned, going to edit the follow-up meeting, which typically happens in April. We're going to bump it to May so that we can have the amount of time that HUD requires. HUD wants 15 days between the public hearing we're having today and then the final review that y'all are going to provide. So that in order for that to happen, we need to move that from March 27th to May 1st. And then when we submit to HUD, they review it. They typically have questions. And if all goes well, we resolve their questions in time for July 1 implementation. The plan itself includes our long-term, short-term goals, our vision, our mission, impact statements, our values. We discuss the priorities that are in the strategic plan, the populations that we're targeting, and the top level of our strategic plan. Section 2 of the plan includes sections related to our housing stock and anticipated changes to that stock, our leasing plans and anticipated changes to leasing, wait list information, and information about the capital fund grant. That is provided to you as well on the following slide, and I'll let you refer to it, but that's the list of public housing capital improvements that are in the MTW plan. Section 3 describes any new activities that we're proposing, and by new activities, we mean any use of the regulatory flexibility that they provide us. And the only thing that this plan includes is actually an edit, an adjustment to an existing activity, local non-traditional activity that would allow us to commit funding to provide services only and not housing assistance. So this would be valuable for certain populations that are not currently residents, but that we might want to provide some services to them. So otherwise, Section 4 then just lists our existing activities, our regulatory waivers for reference purposes. Section 5 includes our budget, in this case, up till now, we posted last year's budget as a reference, and as we go through the budget cycle, we'll update this with the FY25 budget and detail where the MTW funds, sources and uses are going to be. The other new thing that's in this year's plan is the idea of a resident advisory board. This is would be a new body that would provide feedback directly to staff regarding the MTW plan, and it would be made up of both public housing residents as well as Section 8 housing choice voucher residents. From the public housing side, we would pull representatives either from existing resident councils or from a proposed new jurisdiction-wide resident council that's under discussion. And then we would appoint voucher participants either through volunteers or through some other method. And they would work with staff following the timeline of the regular MTW timeline. So starting in the fall, generating ideas and then reviewing the more specific ideas as they develop throughout the year. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Patrick to discuss the proposed changes in the admissions and continued occupancy plans and admin plan.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon. For those of you I have not spoken in front of before. My name is Christine Patrick. I'm one of the assistant directors in operations support over policy. And our policy, just really quickly to differentiate for y'all, is different from what Richard's department is over. They cover the MTW plan and the agency plan, and my department covers the program-specific policies, so the policies that we use to administer public housing and all the voucher programs. So they're very specific to those programs and operations. And I will just fly through this really quickly. Y'all don't need to get a lot of these details right now. They are available in the packet and the slides as well. And I kind of explained the ACOP is what we call the Admissions and Continued Occupancy Policy. That's the plan that has all of the public housing policies in it. And the administrative plan has all of the policies for the voucher programs. So that's Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher and our special voucher programs. These are just some generic slides that we go over every year to give y'all some examples of how that policy is laid out. But just to quickly mention this as well, when you're looking at the revision summaries that are included in your packets of those policy changes we made, the policies that are in the colored boxes are the ones that indicate to you those are ones that we have developed. So anything that's got a white background, that's HUD regulation. Anything that's on a colored background in those policy plans, those are things that we have that are agency specific that we've developed ourselves. Okay, so this is the big one. Almost all of the changes that we're proposing are in response to HOTMA. If you have not heard of this before, this was a big ol' mess of regulations and requirements that HUD put out, and they started putting that out as of 2016 and said, don't worry about this right now, we're doing this in the future. And then last year they said, okay, we're doing it. And so we've been getting on that and trying to get our ducks in a row to make sure that we're implementing this correctly and on time. All of these policies will be effective as of January 1st, 2025. So we're getting our training plans in place, everything behind the scenes as far as operations go. And almost all of these updates to the policies that you're going to see are HOTMA changes, except for one that I'll just point out. This is a HOTMA change. You can see those sections there. And I'm not even going to go into this in depth because the language is the most important part. That's in the revision summaries. But really, we're just putting some time frames on complaint processes. So when we need to respond, when folks need to give us their complaints, who can submit complaints, how we need to process those. All of those guidelines had to be included in our policies to be in alignment with those notices, the PIH notice and the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity notice under HOTMA. And these are also changes that are made to both the ACOP and the admin plan. So this is for both programs. There are only a couple of these changes that they're not doing the same thing for in both programs, and I'll just point that out too. So on this one too, HUD made an update to their HUD 9986 form. They just have, families have the option now when they are looking at that form to either not sign it or they can revoke their consent later. It allows us to pull their income information from other government agencies, and so we're still just opting to require that form for them to remain on our programs. Another HOTMA change where they're actually doing different things between public housing and AHP is that we can now under HOTMA use income determinations that are provided by other agencies. So in the changes in your revision summary, you can see a list. I'll give you the page number for that if you'd like. But there's a list of the potential agencies that we can use the determinations from. So if they've already gone through a program like TANF or Medicaid or SNAP, instead of doing our own income determination, we can use the one that's they've already gone through that process with that other agency, so we can just use that instead. PH is opting not to do that, and AHP is. They're the brave ones here. They're going to be the guinea pigs. So we're going to monitor that and see how it goes for both programs and potentially align them in the future. And that's on page 94 of the revision summary for ACOP with that list of the agencies on there. And then this one is EIV and IVT are two systems that HUD has where we can verify income information for our families. We're just specifying under HOTMA, we have to specify when we're going to be reviewing those reports. Public housing folks are going to be reviewing those at every reexamination, annual reexamination. So they're on triennial research right now, so that's just going to be every 3 years. And then AHP for all the voucher programs, they're going to be doing the same thing, except when we have income information available from those other agencies. So since they're going to be using an income determination, say from Medicaid or SNAP, under that safe harbor determination, they can do the same thing here at reexamination and not use those reports, if that's available. We're going to be able to take self-certification from families for their income under EIV. If they don't have anything else, we can just provide that report and make sure that looks good to them. If they say yes and they give us that self-certification, we can use it. Same thing for their assets. If they own real property or have net assets totaling $50,000 or yet less, and we don't have any other verification, they can provide us that self-certification. And the same thing for if they have non-recurring income. So if we're doing their income determination and we have evidence or have been told that they have some sort of income, but it doesn't happen often enough for us to include that in their income determination, we shouldn't be using that in the calculation, they can self-certify that and basically say, I don't get this often enough for you to be including this in my calculation. So we can take their self-certification for that. And we can also take self-certification for Social Security numbers, but only with also a third-party document that shows us that they've been through a previous process where they've had to prove to another agency at some point that they are who they say they are. So that could be a utility bill, a bank statement, something of that sort. If we've gone through all of our other verifications to say, you know, we can't get the Social Security number or evidence of that, they can provide us that document and self-certify along with that, and we can move forward. And then this is the only policy we're proposing that is not part of HOTMA. We're just aligning our programs because in one of the plans before, this was worded so that we did not have the capability of allowing someone on the program who had previously been terminated from a federally assisted program in the last 3 years. And we wanted that capability. We did have that in the other program and want to be able to look at things on a case-by-case basis. So we're just updating the language to give us the ability to look at that person's situation, and if they were terminated in the last 3 years from a federal housing program, we could still allow them on given the circumstances if we go through that review and see that they should be allowed on. And that was it. Any questions? Second? Okay.
Good.
The MTW plan also includes a summary of our asset management plan, which is how we propose to invest in public housing in Beacon over 5 years. In brief, for public housing, there's $71 million proposed at 24 properties, and there's a map that shows in red where those properties are. And Beacon is $22 million and 22 properties with a map that shows where they are. There's also some discussion of acquisitions, possible acquisitions that we'll be looking at in the coming year, including San Juan 1, Alhambra, Artisan at Mission Creek, and Elon Gardens, and a map as well. And I think with that, we're done with the presentation and can open up the public hearing.
Do we have any questions?
And also ask if there's anyone present who wishes to speak.
Do we have anyone present that wishes to speak in the public hearing? If there's no one, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
We are going to table individual item number 4 to our next meeting. Item number 5. Consideration and appropriate action regarding Resolution 6513, authorizing the sale by Opportunity Homes San Antonio of 3 vacant lots located at 4262 West Cesar Chavez Avenue, San Antonio, Texas 78237, 719 Runnels Avenue, San Antonio, Texas 78208, and 1323 North Walter Street, San Antonio, Texas 78202. The sale by San Antonio Housing Facility Corporation of the vacant lot located at 731 Runnels Avenue, San Antonio, Texas 78208. The expenditure of unrestricted funds, including but not limited to a portion of the proceeds of the sales and all other actions necessary to effect such sales and other matters in connection therewithin. Miranda Castro, Director of Asset Management.
Good afternoon. So this is, I'm bringing to you 4 propositions to dispose of 4 vacant parcels that we have identified that we have obtained through various different funding sources over the last 20 years or so, and we have identified that they do not meet any of our needs for redevelopment or development in the future, and so we are looking to get those marketed and have those leave the portfolio. The first one is on Cesar Chavez. This lot was acquired as part of the Mirasol West Side Reinvestment Initiative in 2000. It was not part of that it was not part of the overall development, and I am recommending that it be sold. This is a map of where the property is located. And then there's a picture. It is the gated area. The next one is 731 Runnels Avenue. This lot was acquired regarding the Wheatley Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant in 2014. Again, it was not utilized as part of that development, and I am recommending that it be sold. Here's where it's located, and then there is a photograph of the lot. The third one is 719 Runnels Avenue. This lot was again acquired as part of the Wheatley Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant in 2014. Again, was not utilized as part of that development, and I am recommending that it be sold. There's the map and then a picture of the lot. So this lot is in between those 2 houses, and this is the smallest of the lots that I am recommending that we sell. The next one is 1323 North Walters. This lot was acquired for the Wheatley Choice Neighborhood. So we have 3 Wheatley Choice Neighborhood master plans in 2004. Again, this was not used in the overall development. I am recommending that it be sold. So this is where it's on the map, and then this is a photograph. So this lot in particular is right next to this church, and it will be likely that we would ask them if they would like to purchase it. That does make the most sense. And then you can see in the corner is that Wheatley housing, so it's right there. So any questions or comments on that?
Is the church using the land already?
Not that we are aware of. Now, they might unofficially be using it, but not that we have.
Congregation meetings or whatever?
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
A motion that we approve Resolution 6513 to go to the full board meeting next week.
And I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Item number 6, consideration and appropriate action regarding Resolution 6516, authorizing the contribution of funds related to the sale of Artisan at Salado Falls and the payoff of debt and other matters in connection therewith. Miranda Castro.
Yes, I am respectfully asking that this go into closed session due to the confidential nature of this discussion, and so I would like to make that request.
We'll move it to closed session.
Thank you.
Counselor?
Yes, sir. The board will now be convening in closed session to discuss real estate and consult with its attorney under sections 551.072 and 551.071 regarding the contribution of funds related to the sale of Artisan and Salado Falls and the payoff of debt. The board would also be discussing personnel and consulting with its attorney under sections 551.074 and 551.071 of the Texas Government Code regarding the president and CEO's performance goals and appraisal for 2024-2025. And I need to inform the board that just before we are to go into closed session, I was informed that apparently it's someone's birthday, or it was recently. And I've been asked to notify the board of that important fact. Happy birthday.
I want to know where were the cupcakes.
There is something in the commissioners' conference room. It may not be what you're thinking, but there's something.
Are we ready? Bring us back in, please.
Opportunity Home San Antonio's Operations and Real Estate Committee has returned to regular session. The time is 4:33 p.m.
I would like to entertain a motion for item number 6, consideration and appropriate action regarding Resolution 6516, authorizing the contribution of funds related to the sale of Artisan at Salado Falls and the payoff of debt and other matters in connection therewith. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn the committee meeting.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. So, tell staff thank you. Oh, yeah.
I'll give them to.